What's up everyone? You're here at Watch Harry. We're dropping something epic today. Harry named Daphne Greengrass his betrothed before Wizengamot at age 11 and Dumbledore lost his vote. Like and subscribe if you enjoy. Let's get started. Chapter 1. The boy who read the cupboard under the stairs had exactly 4 books in it for the first 3 years of Harry's life at number 4, Privet Drive. One was a water-damaged copy of Beginner's Car Maintenance that had belonged to Vernon's father. One was a Sears catalog from 1987 with most of the pages torn out. One was a slim hardback called Introduction to British Birds with a Broken Spine. And the last one, the one Harry read so many times that he could recite passages in the dark, was a battered copy of The Count of Monte Cristo that Petunia had thrown in during a cleaning fit, apparently deciding that something that thick was too heavy to carry to the charity bin. Harry was 6 when he finished it the first time. He was 7 when he understood it. The lesson of The Count of Monte Cristo, boiled down past all the romance and the revenge and the sea caves and the treasure, was this: the man who knows more than everyone else in the room controls the room. Always. Without exception. The man who is underestimated has an advantage the estimators have given him for free. And patience, real patience, the kind that lives in your chest like a coal, is worth more than any sword. Harry filed that away and waited. By the time he was 8, he had read every book in the Dursleys' house, including Vernon's collection of management theory paperbacks that smelled like old coffee. He had read the encyclopedia set in the lounge that Petunia bought for Dudley and which Dudley had never once opened. He had read a decade of Reader's Digest back issues from the box in the garage. He had read the dictionary, cover to cover, once, because it was there and he had nothing else. He was not doing any of this to be impressive. He was doing it because the alternative was sitting in the dark thinking about how hungry he was. The library was a 40-minute walk. The librarians learned his name by his 9th birthday because he came in every Saturday and stayed until closing. Mrs. Albright at the reference desk used to save books for him, history, mostly, and mythology, and anything with maps. She never asked why a small boy with round glasses and a too-big jumper had read every Greek myth in the children's section and was moving on to the adult mythology shelves. She just handed him a library card and told him to be careful with the spines. He was always careful. The strange things that happened around him, the hair growing back overnight, the teacher's wig, the incident with the glass at the zoo, Harry kept a mental list of all of them. He didn't understand them. But he noted them with the same careful attention he gave everything else, because things you don't understand are not things to ignore. They are things to watch. Then, on a Tuesday in July when he was 10 3/4, a letter arrived addressed to Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs. Vernon had gone pale and then purple. Petunia had gone the color of old chalk. Harry had read the letter in about 30 seconds, folded it neatly, put it in his back pocket, and spent the rest of the evening being very quiet while thinking very hard. He had 1 month before September 1st. He intended to use it. Diagon Alley hit him differently than it hit most children seeing it for the first time. Most children saw the magic. Harry saw the structure. He saw a society with its own economy, its own government, its own educational system, its own press. He saw goblins running the bank with the kind of cold efficiency that told him they had been running it for longer than anyone alive could remember, and that they had not kept that position by being careless. He saw shopkeepers who talked about the Ministry of Magic the way the men in the Privet Drive pub talked about Parliament, with equal parts dependence and contempt. He saw old wizards in robes that cost more than Vernon's car standing outside Gringotts talking about something called the Wizengamot in lowered voices. He walked through it all with his eyes open and his mouth mostly shut and listened to everything. He went to Flourish and Blots with more money than he'd ever held in his life. Hagrid had handed him a pouch from his vault with the casual generosity of someone who had never been poor, and bought every textbook on his list, and then stood in the aisle for a long moment before pulling out 7 more books. The Wizarding World, A Political History, 1700 present. Customs, Contracts, and Covenants, A Guide to Wizarding Law. The Noble and Most Ancient Houses of Britain. He bought them all and put them at the bottom of his school trunk under his robes where Hagrid wouldn't comment. Hagrid was kind. Harry genuinely liked him. But Hagrid was also, clearly, deeply loyal to someone called Albus Dumbledore, and kept mentioning this Dumbledore with a reverence that made Harry think about how the people in his history books described kings. He noted that too. He spent 3 nights reading customs, contracts, and covenants cover to cover with a stolen torch under his blanket. By the end of the second night, he had found the chapter on noble house charters. He read it 4 times. Then he lay on his back in the dark staring at the slats of the staircase above him, and thought about a man called Albus Dumbledore who, according to a political history, currently held proxy voting rights over 3 seats on the Wizengamot. One of those seats was listed as held in trust, pending majority or appointment of Lord Potter, House of Potter. Harry read that line 5 more times, just to be sure he understood it. Then he turned to the chapter on betrothal contracts. Madame Malkin's was crowded on a Saturday morning, and Harry was standing on a fitting stool with his arms out while a tape measure did something complicated around his left shoulder when the girl arrived. She came in with a woman who was clearly her mother, same pale hair, same level gray eyes, same way of entering a room like they owned the floor plan. The girl was perhaps a year older than Harry, dressed in plain but clearly expensive robes, and she was looking at him with the direct, assessing gaze of someone who had been taught to evaluate people quickly and thoroughly. Harry looked back. He was used to people looking at him for the scar. This girl was looking at something else. He wasn't sure what. "Hogwarts," she said. Not unfriendly, but not exactly warm either. "First year," Harry said. "You?" "Same." She stepped onto the stool beside him when Madame Malkin gestured. "You're Harry Potter." It wasn't a question. Harry had learned very quickly that people said his name like that, like they were confirming something they already knew and weren't sure how to feel about it. "I am," he said. "And you're?" "Daphne Greengrass." A slight pause. "House Greengrass." "We're neutral." Harry had read about neutral houses. There were 7 of them currently in Britain, families who had made deliberate policy decisions to pledge no public loyalty to either Dumbledore's light faction or the remnants of the dark faction that had scattered after Voldemort's disappearance. They sat in the middle of the Wizengamot and they voted their interests, which made them simultaneously the most courted and the most distrusted people in wizarding politics. "Your father is Cyrus Greengrass," Harry said. "He controls 2 Wizengamot seats." Daphne's fitting paused almost imperceptibly. "You've done your reading." "Some." Harry let the tape measure finish its work. "Does he get approached much?" "About alliances?" "Constantly." Daphne's voice was dry. "From both sides." "It's very tedious." "I imagine." Harry looked at his reflection in the long mirror opposite, a small, dark-haired boy with glasses and a scar and an expression that gave nothing away. He had been practicing that expression in the bathroom mirror for 2 weeks. "Can I ask you something that might seem odd?" Daphne looked at him in the mirror. "You may ask. How does your father feel about Albus Dumbledore?" There was a silence. It was only 2 seconds long, but it was a very full 2 seconds. Then Daphne said, quite carefully, "My father respects Headmaster Dumbledore's abilities." "That's not the same as liking him." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." Harry nodded, slowly, like he was confirming something to himself. "I've been reading about the Potter family charter. It's old, 17th century, I think. Pre-ministry. There's a clause in it about betrothal declarations." Daphne went still. She was good at stillness, the kind of stillness that was actually very intense attention. "I'm familiar with such clauses. Theoretically. If a betrothal is formally declared before the Wizengamot, the declared party's head of house gains the right to cast joint consultative votes alongside the betrothed's house in any division that affects either family's holdings." Harry had memorized the language. It also immediately terminates any previously held proxy arrangements over the minor's seat. The tape measure was done. The fitting room had gone very quiet except for the soft sounds from the next booth where Dudley was presumably being difficult about a second fitting. Daphne turned and looked at Harry directly. Not in the mirror. At him. Her grey eyes were doing complex calculations. You would be naming a betrothed. I would. Harry looked back at her steadily. I'd need someone from a neutral house. Someone whose father is politically positioned but not overextended. Someone intelligent enough to understand the arrangement and not be rattled by it. Someone who goes to Hogwarts. A pause. You fit all of those categories. We've been speaking for 4 minutes, Daphne said. I know. You don't know anything about me. I know your family has been neutral for 3 generations, which means it's principled neutrality, not just fence-sitting. I know you said you may ask instead of go ahead, which is a formal construction, which means you were educated carefully. And I know you're not screaming or running, which means you're either interested or too well-bred to react, and one of those is nearly as useful as the other. Daphne stared at him for a long moment. Then something shifted in her expression, just slightly, just at the corners of her eyes, and Harry got the impression that she was fighting a smile. You're 11, she said. Nearly 11. And you're 12 in April, which makes you 11 now. He had read that in the noble and most ancient houses. Each entry listed the family heir. He had, upon reflection, read the Greengrass entry 3 times. You researched me. I researched everyone. You're the most interesting. There it was again, that fractional shift. She turned away from him and stepped down from the fitting stool with perfect composure. You would need to speak with my father. I know. Harry stepped down as well. I don't have an introduction. You're Harry Potter. You don't need one. She smoothed the front of her half-fitted robes with one precise motion. I'll tell him to expect an owl. Harry nodded. Then, because it was true and because he thought she probably didn't hear it enough, thank you. Daphne looked at him like she wasn't sure what to do with gratitude offered plainly and without obligation. Don't thank me yet, she said. My father has conditions. So do I, Harry said. Her eyes did the smile again. She walked back to her mother without looking back. Harry stood for a moment, then turned to find his own school robes, and thought that he had just done either the smartest or the most reckless thing of his life, and that the distinction might not matter much. The owl he sent to Cyrus Greengrass was 3 paragraphs long. He had drafted it 11 times in the margins of an old Privet Drive phone book before copying the final version onto good parchment he'd bought at Scribulus. It was formal, correct, and said exactly what needed saying without a single unnecessary word. He received a reply within 6 hours. It was 2 paragraphs and requested a meeting at Greengrass House on the last Friday of August. Harry wrote back accepting, then spent 2 weeks rereading his wizarding law books until he knew the betrothal chapter by heart. Greengrass House was in Wiltshire, set back from a tree-lined lane with enough distance from the road that you couldn't see it from the pavement. It was not as large as Harry had expected, not cavernous or imposing, but well kept in the specific way that spoke of real care rather than hired staff. The garden had been tended by someone who knew what they were doing. Cyrus Greengrass met him in the entrance hall. He was a lean man, perhaps 40, with the same pale coloring as Daphne and a handshake that was firm without being a demonstration. Mr. Potter, he said. Punctual. I try to be, sir. Good habit. He led Harry into a sitting room that had books on the shelves and daylight through proper windows. No portraits of family ancestors staring down in judgment, which Harry appreciated. My daughter tells me you approached her directly. I did. That was either very efficient or very rude, depending on your point of view. I considered that, Harry said. I decided that filtering the idea through intermediaries first would only give someone the chance to intercept it. I thought directness was worth the social risk. Cyrus Greengrass looked at him for a moment. Then he sat down and gestured at the chair opposite. Sit. And tell me what you actually want. Harry sat. I want to invoke the betrothal declaration clause in the Potter family charter before the Wizengamot. To name Daphne as my betrothed. This terminates Dumbledore's proxy vote over the Potter seat. It also opens a formal political relationship between House Potter and House Greengrass. He folded his hands in his lap. In return, I'm offering a formal pledge of joint consultation on any vote affecting Greengrass family holdings, a public statement of association that should raise your house's profile with other neutral families who are watching, and an understanding that when I reach majority, the alliance will be renegotiated on terms we both agree to. Cyrus was quiet for a moment. You've read the law. I read everything I could find. The proxy vote arrangement with Dumbledore has been in place since you were 15 months old. He will not surrender it quietly. I know. Harry looked at him directly. I'd rather deal with an angry Dumbledore than a Dumbledore who thinks he owns my vote indefinitely. Something behind Cyrus Greengrass's eyes shifted, a slight warming, like a coal being blown. What do you know about the vote he's been casting in your name? Not as much as I'd like. That's part of the problem. Harry paused. Do you know? Cyrus smiled, briefly. I have suspicions. He leaned back. You understand this will make enemies for you. Not just Dumbledore. The Dark Faction will see an opportunity and push. The Dark Faction's power base is broken and hasn't recovered. Lucius Malfoy is the closest thing they have to an active lord right now, and he's cautious by nature. Harry kept his voice even. I'm not planning to fight anyone. I'm planning to be too complicated to absorb. Cyrus Greengrass looked at him for a long time. Then he said, my daughter agreed to this willingly. She said she'd tell you to expect my owl. That's her version of enthusiastic consent. He picked up a folder from the side table. Inside were documents. Harry could see the dense legal script even from across the room. I have 3 conditions. First, the betrothal is formal but carries no binding obligation beyond the political partnership. Both parties may dissolve it after reaching majority with a 30-day notice, no penalties to either house. Agreed. Second, Daphne is informed of every political decision that affects her family's position before it becomes public. She is not a flag you plant. She is a partner in this arrangement. That was already my intention, but yes. Agreed. Third. Cyrus held Harry's gaze. You look after her at Hogwarts. Not in a way that makes her seem weak, my daughter would hex you for that. But you watch her back the way she'll be watching yours. He said it simply, like a man stating a fact about weather. Harry thought about the girl in Madame Malkin's who had moved through a fitting room like she owned the geometry of it. I'll do my best, sir. Good. Cyrus slid the folder across the table. Read it completely before you sign anything. Harry picked it up and read it completely. It took 40 minutes. Cyrus left him alone with it and came back with tea, which Harry thought was a kind thing to do. The documents were thorough, fair, and contained no hidden clauses. Harry signed them. Daphne came in when the ink was dry. She sat down in the chair her father had vacated, and for a moment they just looked at each other across the tea tray. She was wearing plain robes, her hair loose around her shoulders, and she looked, he tried to find the word, prepared. Like she'd thought about this meeting and decided exactly what version of herself to bring to it. You actually came, she said. I said I would. People say things. She picked up the folder and flipped through it without looking at him. You read all of it? Twice. Find anything objectionable? No. Your father is fair. Harry watched her. Are you all right with this? Daphne looked up from the folder. Why do you ask? Because your father's conditions were all about protecting you. I want to know if you needed protecting from this arrangement or if you wanted it. She was quiet for a moment. Not calculating, actually quiet, like she was letting the question land properly. I wanted it, she said. I think it's the most interesting thing that's happened to my family in 20 years, and I decided in Madame Malkin's that I wanted to be part of it. She put the folder down. That doesn't mean I'm not aware of the risks. What risks are you most concerned about? Dumbledore is not a man who loses gracefully. She said it with the directness of someone who had been listening to dinner-table politics since she could hold a fork. He'll try to find another way to influence you. Through the school, through your friendships, through a narrative he controls. She paused. He's been managing your image for a decade without you knowing it. He won't stop. Harry nodded. I've been thinking about that. And? I think the best thing I can do is be completely visible. No hiding, no playing small, no pretending I don't know what I know. He looked at her steadily. If people know what I'm doing, they can't make up a story about it. Daphne considered this. That requires you to be very good at what you do. Yes. Are you? Harry thought about 6 years of reading everything he could find. About lying in a dark cupboard memorizing legal texts with a stolen torch. About the look on Vernon Dursley's face when Harry had, at age 9, calmly explained the precise legal consequences of keeping a child in conditions that would not pass a council inspection, a fact Harry had found in a leaflet left in the library and memorized for exactly this kind of situation. Vernon had gone purple. But he'd moved Harry to Dudley's second bedroom within the week. I think I'm better than anyone currently expects me to be, Harry said. That'll have to be enough for now. Daphne looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, there's also my sister. Astoria? She's 9. She knows something is happening but not what. A slight softening around her eyes, just barely there and gone quickly. She'll work it out eventually. She always does. Does she need to be kept out of it? She needs to be told the truth when she's ready for it. Daphne straightened. That's not your responsibility. I'm just telling you she exists. Harry thought that was interesting phrasing. Noted, he said. For what it's worth, I think telling children the truth is almost always better than the alternative. Based on personal experience? He thought about Petunia telling him for 9 years that his parents died in a car crash. Based on significant personal experience, yes. Something crossed Daphne's face, not quite pity, not quite recognition. Something in between. She didn't pursue it, which Harry appreciated. She just nodded, once, and stood. The Wizengamot session father has scheduled is the 3rd week of August, she said. Formal dress robes. Arrive 20 minutes early, the clerk's office needs to log the declaration before the session opens. She moved toward the door, then paused. Potter. Greengrass. You said I was the most interesting. In Madame Malkin's. She didn't look at him when she said it. Why? Harry thought about all the houses in the noble and most ancient houses. He thought about the 15 minutes he'd spent on the Greengrass entry, reading the history of a family that had twice been offered positions of enormous power and twice declined them, not out of weakness but out of a principled conviction that independence was worth more than influence granted by another's hand. Because your family kept saying no, he said. Everyone else in that book wanted something. Your family just wanted to be free. Daphne was quiet for a moment. Then she walked out without looking back, and Harry noticed that her shoulders, which had been very precisely squared since she walked in, had dropped a half-inch. The morning of the Wizengamot session, Harry was up at 5:30. He laid out the dress robes he'd bought on a second, quieter trip to Diagon Alley, plain black, no crest yet because he hadn't had the Potter crest authenticated with the College of Heralds, but well cut and formal. He cleaned his glasses twice. He ate the full breakfast he'd made himself because Petunia was not yet awake and he had learned to use that window efficiently. Vernon appeared at the kitchen door in his bathrobe, looked at Harry in dress robes eating toast at 6 in the morning, and retreated without a word. Harry arrived at the Ministry of Magic through the visitor's entrance, the telephone box, which he found completely bizarre, at 7:45. Cyrus Greengrass was waiting for him in the atrium with Daphne at his side. She was in formal robes in Greengrass green, her hair up, and she looked at Harry with the expression of someone who has decided to be utterly composed about something they are actually quite nervous about. Harry walked across the atrium toward them. The security wizard took his wand for weighing. It got logged, Holly, 11 inches, phoenix feather, and the wizard looked up at Harry with an expression that went through 3 phases in about 2 seconds. "Mr. Potter," the wizard said. "Thank you," Harry said, taking his wand back and walking on. Cyrus Greengrass shook his hand briefly. "Ready?" "Yes." Harry looked at Daphne. "You?" "Obviously." She fell into step beside him, and Harry noticed that she matched his pace immediately and naturally, like she'd decided that walking alongside him was a fact that required no adjustment. "The clerk's office is on level 9, Cyrus said, and they walked toward the lifts. The Ministry of Magic at 7:45 in the morning was not fully awake yet, early staff drifting past with coffee, memos zipping through the air in low traffic. Several people recognized Harry as they went, and several more recognized Cyrus Greengrass, and Harry noticed those people trying to figure out why they were together and coming up visibly blank. Good, he thought. Keep them guessing until the session. The clerk's office processed the declaration with the efficiency of people who believed in paperwork above all else. The clerk, a woman of perhaps 60 with half-moon spectacles and the focused energy of someone who has personally corrected the filing systems of 4 administrations, looked at the declaration, looked at Harry, looked at Daphne, looked back at the declaration, and said, "This invokes the 17th century Charter Clause." "Yes," Harry said. "The last time this clause was invoked was 1843. "I know. It's still valid." She looked at him for another moment. Then she stamped the document with a ministry seal, logged it in a book that was clearly magical given the way the entry appeared in 3 places simultaneously, and said, "This will be formally registered upon declaration before the full session. You have 1 hour and 12 minutes. Don't be late." "We won't," Harry said. They walked out into the corridor, and Daphne murmured beside him, "You're not even slightly nervous." "I'm nervous," Harry said. "I've just decided not to let it show." She was quiet for half a step. "How?" "I keep thinking about what I'm doing and why, instead of who's watching." He looked at her. "You?" "Same strategy." She paused. "It's a better strategy than I expected. We thought of it independently." He held the lift door. "Might mean we think alike. Or might mean it's just the obvious strategy," she said, stepping in. "Could be both," he said, and stepped in after her. The Wizengamot chamber was a large, circular room that made Harry think immediately of the Roman Senate, tiered seats in a ring, a speaking floor in the center, high windows that admitted a cool gray light. It smelled of old wood and parchment and the faint electric quality of a room where magic was used regularly. It was filling up. Harry noticed the factions assembling, not dramatically, not in uniform, but in the quiet gravitational way of people who knew which tier they belonged on. The light faction clustering on the north side. The dark adjacent families on the south. The neutrals scattered strategically across the middle. He noticed Albus Dumbledore immediately. Dumbledore was on the north tier, speaking with a woman Harry recognized from his political history reading as Amelia Bones. He was wearing deep purple robes and had the same air of benevolent authority that Harry had read about, the sense of a man so accustomed to being the wisest person in every room that it had become a kind of unconscious posture. He hadn't seen Harry yet. Harry and Daphne took their seats in the visiting gallery, lords, proxies and guests sat there until a declaration was called, and Cyrus moved to his family's seat on the neutral tier. Daphne sat with her hands folded in her lap, perfectly straight, looking at nothing in particular in a way that meant she was looking at everything. "He's going to see us in about 40 seconds, she said quietly. "I know. He'll come over. Let him." She glanced at him sideways. "What do you want me to do?" "Just be exactly as you are," Harry said. "That's already more than enough." Daphne looked at him for a fraction of a second like she wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a tactical observation. Harry kept his face neutral and she turned back to the chamber. 43 seconds later, Albus Dumbledore noticed Harry Potter sitting in the visiting gallery of the Wizengamot. He came across the chamber floor with the unhurried pace of a man who never needed to hurry. Harry watched him come and noted the exact moment when Dumbledore registered Daphne beside him, a fractional pause, a reassessment, a very brief sharpening behind the famously warm eyes. "Harry," he said, reaching the gallery rail. "What a wonderful surprise. I didn't realize you were interested in attending a session." "Good morning, Professor Dumbledore," Harry said. He did not stand. "I hope the session goes well." Dumbledore's gaze moved to Daphne. "And this young lady is?" "Daphne Greengrass," Daphne said, pleasantly, the way someone says I am armed without saying it. "Ah." Dumbledore looked between them. "I was not aware you two had met." "Madame Malkins," Harry said. "For school robes." He smiled, which he had practiced specifically because he wanted it to be warm and tell absolutely nothing. "Do you know, I find I'm quite looking forward to Hogwarts. I've been reading quite a lot this summer." "Is that so?" Dumbledore's voice was gentle, curious, and not entirely comfortable. "What sort of reading?" "History, mostly," Harry said. "Wizarding law. Family charters." He kept his eyes on Dumbledore pleasantly. "The sort of background reading I thought would help me understand my world." He watched Dumbledore understand, all at once, why Harry was in this building on this morning in formal dress robes with a Greengrass at his side. It was, Harry thought, rather like watching a very experienced chess player realize they are 3 moves behind without having seen when it happened. To his credit, Dumbledore did not react. The warmth in his eyes dimmed precisely a half-degree and then was back, steady and kind as lamplight. "Well," he said, "I'm sure whatever you need to attend to today will be educational." A pause. "You know, Harry, if you have questions about the wizarding world, about your family's history, about any of this," he gestured gently at the chamber, "my door is always open." "That's very kind, sir." Harry looked at him steadily. "I'll keep it in mind." Dumbledore held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds, smiled at both of them, and walked back to the north tier. Daphne said nothing until he was out of earshot. Then, very quietly, he knew. "The moment he saw you sitting next to me, yes. And he came over to assess the situation. And offer himself as my resource, which is another way of offering to be between me and the information I need." Harry watched Dumbledore resume his conversation with Amelia Bones, nothing in his posture showing that anything had happened. "He's very good." "Yes," Daphne said. "Don't underestimate him." "I won't." Harry looked at her. "Don't let him find a way to talk to you alone, if you can avoid it. He'll try to be kind to you. It'll be genuine. And it'll still be an attempt to understand our arrangement through you." Daphne looked slightly affronted. "I'm aware of how information extraction works, Potter." "I know. I'm saying it anyway because you deserve to have it said." She looked at him for a moment. "You do that," she said, sounding like she was filing it away. "Do what?" "Say the things that should be obvious but aren't." She turned back to the chamber. "It's unusual." The session was called to order. The Chief Warlock opened proceedings, and there was 30 minutes of routine business, ministry budget discussions, a proposal about broomstick import regulations, a motion regarding the classification of some creature Harry hadn't heard of. He watched the voting patterns carefully, noting which way the neutrals broke on each issue and who they looked at before raising their hands. Then the clerk said, Item 7. Declaration of formal betrothal under Noble House Potter Family Charter, 17th century provision, presented by Lord Harry James Potter. The chamber went very still. Harry stood. He walked to the speaking floor, which felt a great deal larger from the center than from the gallery, and he put his hands behind his back so no one could see if they were entirely steady, and he looked up at the tiered seats full of adult wizards and witches who were all looking at him with an assortment of expressions ranging from shock to calculation to something that might have been admiration. He didn't think about any of that. He thought about the text he'd memorized. I am Harry James Potter, he said, and his voice was clear and even in the acoustic chamber. Lord of the most noble house of Potter, by right of blood and lineage. Under the terms of the Potter Family Charter, dated the 14th of March, 1642, and recognized by this body in full session on the 29th of June, 1642, I invoke the right of betrothal declaration. He paused. I name Daphne Isidora Greengrass, heir of the most noble and ancient house of Greengrass, as my formally declared betrothed. He heard the chamber react, not in words but in sound, the aggregate shift of 60 people all processing the same information at the same time. Under the terms of this charter provision, I call for the immediate dissolution of all proxy arrangements over the Potter seat, as a declared lord has invoked his full political standing. He looked, once, across at the North Tier. Dumbledore's face was perfectly composed. The eyes were not. House Potter and House Greengrass have entered a formal agreement of political partnership, witnessed by Lord Cyrus Greengrass and registered with the clerk of this body as of this morning's session. Harry reached into his robes and placed the certified document on the clerk's table. I ask that this declaration be entered into the record. He walked back to his seat. The chief warlock said something about confirmation of documents, and there was a moment of procedural exchange, and then he said, the declaration is confirmed and entered. The proxy arrangement over the Potter seat is dissolved as of this session. The vote was automatic. Charter provisions didn't require a vote, they just required a witness. But Harry heard one or two people on the North Tier say something that wasn't quite calm, and he heard someone on the South Tier laugh softly and say something to their neighbor, and he heard absolutely nothing from where Dumbledore was sitting. Daphne was sitting exactly as she had been when he'd left. She did not look at him when he sat down. But beneath the perfect composure of her folded hands, her right thumb moved once against her left, the faintest possible motion, and Harry thought that was probably Daphne Greengrass for well done. He decided he'd take it. They were in the corridor outside the chamber 10 minutes later, waiting for Cyrus to finish speaking with two other lords, when a man in expensive dark robes stopped in front of them. Lucius Malfoy was tall, blonde, and looked at the world with the permanent expression of someone who found it consistently below standard. He examined Harry with pale eyes and then looked at Daphne with something that might have been respect if it passed through several filters first. Mr. Potter, he said. That was quite a performance. Thank you, Harry said. I wasn't performing. A slight pause. No, Lucius said slowly. I don't believe you were. He looked between them. House Greengrass has historically been unaffiliated. Proudly, Daphne said. Yes. His gaze returned to Harry. I confess I'm curious what you're building, Mr. Potter. I'm building options, Harry said. Lucius Malfoy looked at him for a moment that was slightly longer than polite neutrality required. Then he inclined his head, fractionally, precisely, and moved on. Daphne watched him go. He'll be back. I know. Harry watched the corridor. Two more people were moving toward them with the determined walk of people who want to introduce themselves. So will about 6 others. Are you ready for that? Harry looked at the approaching figures, and then at Daphne beside him, composed, careful, her grey eyes steady and already evaluating, and thought about a boy in a cupboard reading the Count of Monte Cristo and learning, at 7 years old, that knowledge was the only currency that nobody could steal from you while you slept. Yeah, he said. Let's see what they want. Daphne's thumb did the thing against her hand again. Harry decided that was her version of a smile, and he found, somewhat to his surprise, that it was enough. Chapter 2, 14 votes. The first person to reach them was a woman Harry didn't recognize, which lasted approximately 3 seconds before he placed her from his reading. Augusta Longbottom moved like someone who had decided decades ago that the world would simply have to accommodate her pace, and she carried a hat with a stuffed vulture on it that Harry chose not to comment on. She was 60-something, sharp-eyed, and she looked at Harry the way people looked at architecture they were deciding whether to trust. "Harry Potter," she said. It came out like a verdict. "Lady Longbottom," Harry said. He'd read about her, old light faction, but the kind of old that predated Dumbledore's particular brand of it, the kind that had its own principles and sometimes found Dumbledore's management style as irritating as Harry did, though for different reasons. Her son and daughter-in-law were in St. Mungo's. He knew that too, and made sure none of that knowledge showed on his face because she would not want his pity, and he respected that. "You've done your reading," she said, the same way Daphne had said it in Madame Malkin's, as an observation about character rather than a compliment. "I try to." Her gaze moved to Daphne. Something passed between them that Harry couldn't entirely read. The older woman's expression shifted through recognition, assessment, and something that might have been approval, in that order. "Greengrass," she said. "Lady Longbottom," Daphne said. Augusta looked back at Harry. "The Longbottom seat has been voting with Dumbledore's faction for 12 years, she said, without preamble. "Not because I agree with everything he does. Because there was no sensible alternative." She paused, letting that sit. "There may be a conversation worth having, in due course. I make no commitments. I am stating a fact." "I appreciate facts," Harry said. She looked at him for one more moment, then turned and left with the same decisive efficiency with which she'd arrived. Daphne leaned slightly toward him and said under her breath, "That was the political equivalent of a marriage proposal." "I'll put it next to the actual one," Harry murmured. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh and was absolutely not going to be acknowledged as one. The second person was a man named Tiberius Ogden, who represented a brewing family with 4 Wizengamot votes and the kind of friendly demeanor that Harry had learned to read as professional warmth rather than personal warmth, useful, not unkind, but fundamentally about business. He shook Harry's hand, said several things that meant "I am interested in your political project" while actually saying things about legacy and family tradition, and moved on after Harry responded in kind, cordial, non-committal, leaving the door open. The third person tried to give Harry a card. Harry took it politely and put it in his inner pocket, knowing that whatever faction that man represented would need a great deal more research before Harry engaged with them properly. By the time Cyrus Greengrass detached himself from the lords he'd been speaking with and came to collect them, Harry had been approached 6 times, declined a private dinner invitation, been looked at disapprovingly by 2 people on the North Tier who were clearly Dumbledore loyalists and wanted him to know it, and had a brief, strange moment where a witch he'd never seen before walked past, caught his eye, and nodded with an expression of profound personal satisfaction before disappearing into a crowd. "Who was that?" he asked Daphne. "Marchioness Selwyn," Daphne said. "Neutral. She's been waiting for someone to strip Dumbledore of a proxy vote for about 8 years. A pause. "I think she might have sent you a fruit basket if she knew your address." Noted. Harry watched the corridor. 6 approaches in 12 minutes. "The serious ones will wait," Cyrus said, arriving beside them. He had the satisfied look of a man whose investment had just paid an unexpected dividend. "What you did today will take 48 hours to fully settle into the political landscape. The people who approached you immediately are the ones who react on instinct. The ones worth talking to are in their offices right now, thinking." "Like Lucius Malfoy," Harry said. Cyrus glanced at him. "You spoke with Malfoy?" "Briefly. He said he was curious what I was building." "And what did you tell him?" "That I was building options." Cyrus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That is a very good answer," in a tone that suggested he was recalibrating something. He began moving toward the lifts. "We'll have lunch. There's a private room at the Leaky Cauldron that doesn't echo." Daphne fell into step beside Harry. The corridor was thinning as the session adjourned and people dispersed, but Harry noticed that several people watched them go, and that none of those watching looks were casual. "How long before Dumbledore makes a move?" Harry asked, quietly enough for Daphne alone. "He already has," she said. "Did you see him speak to Griselda Marchbanks as we were leaving the chamber?" Harry had not. He filed that away as something to correct. He needed to expand his peripheral attention in crowded rooms. "What does Marchbanks control?" "She doesn't control anything. But she has the ear of 4 swing votes on the Education Subcommittee." Daphne's voice was calm, informational. "The school is under ministry educational oversight in theory, but in practice the headmaster has significant discretion. If Dumbledore can't influence you through the Wizengamot, he'll look for leverage through Hogwarts. Through our grades. House points. Scheduling. Through all of it, yes." She looked straight ahead. "He's not petty. He won't make you miserable. He'll make it very easy to depend on him." Harry thought about that as they stepped into the lift. "That's actually more difficult to resist than hostility." "Yes," Daphne said. "It is." The private room at the Leaky Cauldron had 4 chairs, a table, and a small window onto the rain-grey alley. Tom the barkeep brought them a lunch that was good without being memorable, which Harry thought was exactly the right kind of lunch for a serious conversation. Cyrus waited until Tom had left and the silencing charm was up before he looked across the table at Harry with an expression that had dropped all its diplomatic insulation. It was just direct intelligence now, the way a magistrate looks when the courtroom has emptied. "What do you actually know about the night your parents died?" he said. Harry looked at him steadily. "Less than I should. More than I'm supposed to." "Meaning?" "Meaning I've read enough to know that there are versions of what happened that I haven't been told, and that the person most responsible for telling me is also the person with the most to gain from the specific version I believe." He picked up his fork. "I don't know what Dumbledore's full agenda is. I know he has one." Cyrus leaned back. The Potter seat was one of 5 proxy arrangements Dumbledore has accumulated over the past 15 years. You've dissolved one today. The others are complicated. Who are the other 4? The McKinnon seat, which is legally in abeyance following the family's deaths during the war and therefore arguably not valid. The Pruitt seat, which he holds for the Weasley family. The Pruitt line merged into Weasley 2 generations ago and Arthur Weasley has never challenged it, I suspect because he doesn't know he could. He paused. The Bones seat, partial proxy only, Amelia Bones could dissolve it herself if she chose to. And the Longbottom seat, which Augusta Longbottom will dissolve herself the moment she has a reason to. You just told me to speak with Augusta Longbottom, Harry said. I didn't tell you anything, Cyrus said. I mentioned some facts in proximity to each other. Harry looked at Daphne. She was eating her lunch with the composed expression of someone listening to music they've heard before and still find interesting. What does Dumbledore do with the votes? Harry asked. He wins, Cyrus said simply. Not always on the large votes, those attract too much scrutiny. But the mid-tier procedural votes, the ones that shape what questions can even be brought to a full session, the committee appointments, he has been architecturally constructing the Wizengamot's decision-making apparatus for 15 years. Slowly. Patiently. He looked at Harry. He is very good at this. I know, Harry said. And then, because something had been sitting in the back of his mind since the chamber, he's good at it because he actually believes he's right. He's not doing it for power. He thinks he's protecting people. Cyrus was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. That's exactly what makes him dangerous. Daphne set her fork down. Someone who knows they're self-interested can be negotiated with, she said. Someone who believes they're righteous will sacrifice anything for their conviction. The table was quiet. Outside the window, the alley was filling up with afternoon foot traffic. Harry watched a child drag her father toward a broom shop and thought about how simple that looked and how far from simple his own day had been and how little he would trade it. 14, he said. Cyrus looked at him. That's the number of votes in play if you strip out the clearly immovable faction loyalties on both sides and look at the Wizengamot's persuadable center. Harry had done this calculation 3 times in the past 2 weeks, each time getting the same number. 7 neutral seats, for swing votes in the independent tier, 2 in the old families who've never formally aligned but consistently vote light except when their specific interests are threatened, and the Longbottom seat, which Augusta told me herself is conditional. He looked at Cyrus. That's enough to decide any divided vote. That's enough to set agenda. That's enough to block Dumbledore's procedural plays if they're coordinated. Cyrus Greengrass looked at Harry Potter for a very long moment. You're 11 years old, he said. Nearly, Harry said. Daphne made the not laugh sound again, quietly. I'm not trying to run the Wizengamot, Harry continued. I'm not trying to build a faction. I'm trying to make it so that the 14 votes in the middle don't have to choose between Dumbledore's faction and the remnants of the dark, because that binary is how Dumbledore keeps winning and it's how the next Voldemort gets started. If the middle can act as a genuine third force, he stopped. Sorry. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. No, Cyrus said thoughtfully. But hearing my own thoughts articulated by an almost 11-year-old is a novel experience. He was quiet for a moment. This takes years. You understand that. I have years. I start Hogwarts in September. Hogwarts is also a political environment. Good. I'd rather practice on people my own age. Harry looked between them. I need to start learning to do magic properly before anything else matters anyway. Theory only gets you so far. Further than most, Daphne said. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't entirely categorize, like she was adding a column of numbers and kept arriving at the same sum and finding it surprising. How much magic have you actually done? Accidental only. I've never held a wand for longer than Ollivander's. He paused. I've read the theory on basic casting quite thoroughly. Theory and practice are not the same thing in magic, she said. Unlike law, where reading the text gets you most of the way. I know. He wasn't worried about it, which was perhaps slightly irrational, but he'd been not worried about things before and been right. I'll learn. She looked at him for a moment. You said that the same way my father says things are going to happen. Not a criticism. An observation. Does he get them right? Usually. A pause. Annoyingly often. They parted outside the leaky cauldron in the mid-afternoon. Cyrus had 3 more meetings and disappeared back into the alley with the efficient purpose of a man whose day had become considerably more interesting than planned. Daphne waited while Harry hailed the night bus, which appeared with a catastrophic bang and nearly knocked over a postbox, and which Harry boarded with the composure of someone who had read enough about it to be prepared, and then she said, in the last moment before the doors folded shut, Potter. He turned. Don't let the Sorting Hat put you somewhere that isn't right for you. She said it quickly, like she'd decided to say it and wanted to commit before she changed her mind. Whatever it suggests, trust your own judgment. He looked at her. What house are you expecting? Slytherin. No hesitation. My whole family is Slytherin. You'll find some of us are better than the reputation. I'll remember that. The bus was beginning to vibrate with impatience. Greengrass. Potter. It was a good day. She looked at him for a moment with those calculating gray eyes, and this time the shift at the corners happened a little more visibly than it had before. Yes, she said. It was. She stepped back. Don't die before September. The doors closed and the night bus screamed across London, and Harry held onto a brass pole and thought that whatever else the next 7 years held, they were not going to be boring. Back at Privet Drive, everything was exactly as he had left it: Dudley's bike in the garden, the net curtains in the front window, the particular silence of a house that had never once been happy to see him. Harry went up to Dudley's second bedroom with his dress robes over his arm and changed back into ordinary clothes and sat on his bed and thought. He thought for a long time. Dumbledore was a problem, not an immediate one, but a persistent one, the kind that didn't announce itself and didn't go away. Harry had seen the man's face in the moment after the declaration, and what he'd seen was not anger. Anger would have been reassuring. What he'd seen was recalibration, a very fast, very quiet adjustment, the kind made by someone who has lost a piece but not the game and is already thinking 3 moves forward. That was more concerning than anger. Harry picked up a political history from the stack by his bed and found the chapter on Dumbledore. It was 15 pages long, respectful, and carefully avoided saying several things that the surrounding facts clearly implied. Harry had annotated it over the past 2 weeks with small notes in the margins, question marks, asterisks, cross-references. He went through it again now looking for anything he'd missed the first 3 times. He found, in a footnote on page 212, a reference to something called the Prophecy Archive. The ministry maintained sealed records of prophecies made by registered seers. The note was academic and dry and mentioned the archive in the context of a political controversy in 1979, which was the year before Harry was born, and which had coincided with a sudden acceleration in Voldemort's campaign of terror. Harry stared at that footnote for a very long time. He put the book down. He would need more information than he currently had, and he couldn't get it from a book. That was frustrating, but it was also manageable. He had years. He picked up his wand from the desk. He'd taken to keeping it out since he bought it, getting used to the weight of it in his hand. Ollivander had said it was unusual, that wand and wizard choosing each other, and that holly and phoenix feather was a notable combination. He hadn't explained why, and Harry had been too focused on other things to press him. He looked at the wand now, 11 inches of warm-toned wood, and thought about Daphne saying, "Don't let the Sorting Hat put you somewhere that isn't right for you." He already knew what the Sorting Hat would see in him. The question was what he intended to do about it. 3 days later, the owl post brought him a letter he hadn't expected. It was from Neville Longbottom. The handwriting was careful in the way of someone who'd been told their handwriting was messy and was trying very hard, and the letter was brief and slightly stilted in the way of someone who had drafted it more than once. It said, essentially, "My grandmother told me that Harry Potter is starting Hogwarts this year and that I should write to him. I don't really know what to say. I'm not very good at magic. Gran says that doesn't matter. I think Gran is being kind. I like herbology. Do you have a toad? Mine is called Trevor." Harry read it twice, then smiled. He wrote back a response that was warm and direct and told Neville that he also didn't know many people, that he had an owl named Hedwig who was considerably better at letter writing than he was, and that he had never met a toad personally but had read that they were excellent judges of character. He asked what Neville's favorite plants were. He sent it off with Hedwig that evening. She nipped his finger affectionately on her way out the window, which he had learned meant approximately, "I've got it, stop fussing." He thought about the Longbottom seat and what Cyrus had said about Augusta waiting for a reason. He thought about Daphne's voice, someone who believes they're righteous will sacrifice anything. He thought about a boy who wasn't very good at magic and whose parents were in St. Mungo's and who had written to a stranger because his grandmother told him to, and who had been kind about it despite clearly being nervous. Harry decided that whatever else he did this year, Neville Longbottom was going to be his friend. Not for the Wizengamot seat. Not as a political asset. Just because Trevor the Toad was an excellent judge of character and Harry had just been approved. Neville wrote back 4 days later with 3 paragraphs about herbology, which were genuinely interesting, and a postscript that said, "Gran mentioned your name was in the Prophet this morning. She looked pleased. I don't know what that means." Harry didn't get the Prophet, but he borrowed one from the corner shop the next day under the guise of helping the elderly man who ran it reach the top shelf, and found the article on page 4. Potter heir invokes ancient charter, political landscape shaken. The byline was a name he didn't know, and the article was mostly accurate, which surprised him. It described the Wizengamot session, the betrothal declaration, the dissolution of the proxy arrangement, and included 2 quotes, one from someone described as a source close to the Dumbledore faction who said it was a surprising but valid action in the particular tone that meant we are furious and choosing not to show it, and one from Cyrus Greengrass, who had clearly prepared a statement in advance because it was nearly a perfect single paragraph. Lord Cyrus Greengrass, patriarch of the neutral House Greengrass and future father-in-law to Lord Potter, confirmed the betrothal agreement is formalized and registered. House Greengrass has always believed that political sovereignty is the foundation of principled governance. Lord Potter's decision to invoke his family charter is consistent with those values, and we are pleased to stand alongside him. Harry read that 4 times. He noticed that Cyrus had said future father-in-law rather than something more tentative, which was a deliberate public strengthening of the arrangement. He noticed that he'd used the phrase political sovereignty, which was the kind of term that neutral families and independent voters responded well to, and that Dumbledore's faction, which tended toward language about protection and guidance, couldn't easily argue with. And he noticed that the last sentence put House Greengrass explicitly as standing alongside Harry rather than behind him or above him, which was the kind of phrasing that other neutral houses would notice. Cyrus Greengrass, Harry thought, was very good at this. He wrote Neville back and said that he hoped whatever was in the prophet was useful and that he looked forward to meeting him on the 1st of September. 2 weeks before the Hogwarts Express, an owl arrived from Dumbledore. It was handwritten, long, and kind. It spoke about the wizarding world and the importance of guidance and the value of having people you could trust around you. It mentioned several times, in different ways, that Hogwarts was a safe place and that Harry should feel free to come to Dumbledore with any concerns, any questions, anything at all. It contained one sentence that Harry read 4 times, "I understand the actions taken at the recent Wizengamot session, and while the choice was of course entirely your own, I hope very much that we can discuss the matters involved at some point, so that you might have a complete picture." Harry thought about the phrase complete picture. He thought about the footnote in the political history about the prophecy archive. He thought about the fact that Dumbledore had not mentioned the proxy vote dissolution at all except by implication, which meant he was not prepared to acknowledge it directly, which meant he was still deciding how to respond to it. He wrote back a response that was 2 paragraphs long, polite, warm, and said absolutely nothing of substance. He thanked Dumbledore for his letter, expressed enthusiasm for Hogwarts, and said he very much looked forward to learning. He did not acknowledge the complete picture line at all, because responding to it meant either accepting the implication that his picture was incomplete or rejecting it defensively, and neither served him. He was going to be a student at Dumbledore's school. That was going to require a specific kind of careful. He filed the letter in the folder at the back of his trunk next to the certified betrothal documents. The letter from Daphne arrived on a Wednesday, 3 days before September 1st. It was not long. She wasn't someone who wrote long things when short things would do. It gave him 3 pieces of information, listed in order with the brisk efficiency of someone composing a briefing. First, 2 more neutral families had sent formal notes of interest to Cyrus following the prophet article, the Abbots and the Knots. She flagged that the Knots were technically neutral but had dark adjacent sympathies that made them strategic complications rather than genuine allies. Second, she had heard from a cousin in the ministry that the Dumbledore faction had held an informal dinner 4 days ago with a guest list that included 2 of the swing vote lords Harry had counted in his 14. Third, and this one was written in a slightly different tone, slightly less clipped, Astoria found the prophet article and has now been asking questions for 5 days. I've told her the basics. She has decided you are either very clever or very brave and cannot decide which. I told her the distinction might not matter much. She says that's something a Slytherin would say. I am choosing to take it as a compliment. Harry read the last paragraph 3 times and felt something in his chest do something warm and slightly inconvenient. He wrote back, "Tell Astoria I said hello, and that in my experience, clever and brave are the same thing in different lighting. Looking forward to the train." He paused, then added, "I've been practicing with my wand. I think I understand what Ollivander meant." He sent it off and sat with Hedwig for a while, letting her sit on his shoulder while she pretended to be asleep, and he thought about all the pieces moving around a board he was only beginning to understand the full dimensions of. The thing was, and he kept coming back to this, Dumbledore wasn't wrong that Harry needed guidance. Harry was 10, almost 11, and he'd read widely, but he'd never actually lived in this world, never moved through it daily, never learned the 1,000 small things you only learn by being present for years. He knew the legal framework and the political map. He didn't know which corridor in Hogwarts smelled of something strange on Thursday afternoons, or which teacher responded well to questions before class versus after. He didn't know how to cast Wingardium Leviosa yet, he just knew the theory. There was a lot he didn't know. The difference was that he wanted to learn it for himself, from a position of his own. Not delivered through someone else's selection process, colored by someone else's judgment of what he needed to understand. Dumbledore's guidance came with a cost. The cost was that it was Dumbledore's version of Harry's world, and Harry suspected that version had some significant edits. He'd read The Count of Monte Cristo. He knew what happened when you let someone else control your information. The night before September 1st, Harry packed his trunk with the focused care of someone who understood that what you brought to a new place said something about who you were and who you intended to be. His schoolbooks, all of them, plus the 7 supplementary texts at the bottom. His wand in his inside pocket. Hedwig in her cage, mildly offended about the cage but philosophical about it. His folder of documents in the padded section of the trunk. A photograph of his parents that he'd bought from a street photographer in Diagon Alley who had a box of old wizarding photographs and had not known what he was selling. Harry had seen it by accident, his mother's red hair and his father's glasses, both of them laughing in a garden, and he'd bought it quickly and quietly and not examined it too closely until he was back on the bus home. He'd looked at it for a long time that night. He didn't cry. He thought about it and decided that he wasn't ready to do that yet, and that was all right. He propped the photograph against his lamp for the night and went to sleep. In the morning he was up at 6, had his trunk at the door by 7, and was eating toast when Vernon came downstairs and looked at the trunk and then at Harry and opened his mouth. "I'll arrange for the taxi," Harry said, before Vernon could say whatever he was preparing. "It'll be here by 10. Vernon closed his mouth. Harry ate his toast. "Is this?" Vernon started, and stopped. Harry waited. "Are you coming back?" Vernon asked, and the question was so stripped of its usual bluster that for a moment Harry almost felt something for the man. Not affection. But something. "For summers, I expect," Harry said. "School is September through June." He looked at Vernon steadily. "You won't have to do much. I can take care of myself." Vernon looked at him for a long moment, at the dress, the careful posture, the expression that gave nothing away, and whatever he was seeing seemed to be something different from what he'd seen for 10 years. "You've changed," he said. "I've always been like this," Harry said. "You weren't looking." Vernon had no answer for that. He made himself tea and sat at the other end of the table, and they sat in a silence that was, for the first time in 10 years at Privet Drive, not hostile. Just quiet. Petunia came downstairs at 8 and looked at Harry and looked at the trunk and looked out the window and said, very quietly, so quietly Harry nearly missed it, "Your mother would have liked to see you go." Then she went to make tea and didn't look at him again. Harry sat very still for a moment. Then he picked up his toast and finished it, because it was good toast and breakfast was important, and he thought that some things you put in a folder at the back of a trunk, and some things you just carried with you, and you learned the difference over time. The taxi arrived at 10 past 10. Harry Potter left Privet Drive with his trunk, his owl, his wand, and 14 votes in a board he was only just beginning to play, and he did not look back. Chapter 3, Platform and Compartment. King's Cross at 11 in the morning was the particular brand of chaos that only a major London terminus could produce: trolleys colliding, pigeons doing something inadvisable near the ceiling, a man in a suit shouting into a mobile phone about Frankfurt. Harry navigated it with his trunk on a trolley and Hedwig's cage balanced on top, checking the departure boards out of habit even though he already knew where he was going. Between platforms 9 and 10, there was a barrier. He'd read about it. The description in customs, contracts, and covenants was typically dry. Access to platform 9 3/4 is achieved via a concealment barrier maintained by the Ministry's Transportation Office, located between the 9th and 10th platforms of King's Cross Station. He'd also found a brief mention in a Muggle-focused pamphlet that the Ministry apparently issued to Muggle-born families, which had been tucked inside a copy of Wizarding Life for Beginners at Flourish and Blotts, probably left by accident. The pamphlet said, "Walk at the barrier with confidence. Do not stop." Harry walked at the barrier with confidence. He didn't stop. The other side was immediately, completely different: the steam, the scarlet engine, the noise of families and owls and cats, the smell of something warm and slightly magical that he couldn't identify but which felt, in a way he didn't examine too closely, like arriving somewhere he'd been before. He found a porter for his trunk, settled Hedwig's cage onto the luggage rack himself because he didn't want her rattled, and then stood on the platform for a moment just watching. He saw the Weasley family from 20 feet away, impossible to miss, the red hair and the noise and the sheer quantity of them, a mother issuing rapid instructions while children dispersed in several directions at once. He noted them without approaching. Arthur Weasley and the Pruitt proxy vote was a conversation for when they were older and had built some foundation first. He saw Neville Longbottom before Neville saw him. He recognized him from the description in Augusta's family entry in the noble houses: round face, solidly built, looking at the crowd with the expression of someone braced for something to go wrong. He had a toad in his hands and was holding it with the focused attention of someone who had lost it before and intended not to lose it again. Harry walked over. "Trevor," he said. Neville spun around. Yes, how did you?" He stopped. "Harry?" "Neville." Harry put his hand out and Neville shook it with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been practicing. "He looks exactly as I expected. Wise face." Neville looked at Trevor, who regarded Harry with the flat serenity of a toad that had seen things. "He's not actually wise," Neville said. "He just looks like it." "Best kind," Harry said. "Do you have a compartment?" "Not yet, Gran. She left. She hates long goodbyes. I was just going to." "Come on, then." Harry moved toward the train. "We'll find one before they're all full." Neville followed, looking slightly stunned at the efficiency of it, and Harry thought that this was, in fact, how most good things happened, not by waiting for them to arrive but by deciding to go. They found a compartment 4 cars down that had 2 students already in it, a girl with bushy brown hair who was reading a thick spell book with the focused ferocity of someone cramming for an exam that was already in progress, and a red-haired boy who was eating his way through a packet of crisps and looking out the window with the particular expression of someone performing casualness. The girl looked up when they came in. Her eyes went to Harry's face and then, Harry saw it happen, to his forehead, and then she made an effort to look at him normally. "Is this compartment full?" Harry asked. "No," the girl said, a half-second before the boy could answer. "Please sit down. I'm Hermione Granger." "This is Ron Weasley," the boy said, recovering. He looked at Harry with the same energy of suppressed recognition that everyone had. "You're Harry Potter." "I am." Harry sat down across from Hermione and Neville settled beside him. "This is Neville Longbottom." "Longbottom," Ron said, like he was searching his memory. "Your Gran is." "Yes," Neville said, with the patience of someone who had been identified by their grandmother for their entire life. Hermione had already looked back at her spellbook, then looked up again. "I've read all the course books," she said to Harry, with the slightly combative tone of someone who expected to be challenged on this. "Have you?" "Yes," Harry said. She looked at him, recalibrated. All of them? And a few that aren't on the list. He looked at the book in her hands. It was the standard book of spells, grade 1, but she'd clearly found annotations or a more advanced edition because the margins were dense with neat handwriting. Is that your own copy or the standard print? My own annotations, she said, looking slightly defensive and slightly pleased at the same time. I cross-referenced the theory sections with a beginner's guide to transfiguration because some of the explanations are incomplete. The wrist motion chapter, Harry said. Yes. The standard text doesn't account for wand cores. Hermione stared at him. Then she flipped to a page and turned the book around so he could see it. In the margin next to the wrist motion diagram, in her neat handwriting, was a note, query, does core material affect required force? Cf. Wand Theory Chapter 4. Harry looked at it and felt something he didn't experience often enough, the specific satisfaction of meeting someone who did the same kind of thinking he did and had arrived at the same questions independently. I've been wondering the same thing. Hermione smiled. It transformed her face entirely, knocked about 10 years of anxious watchfulness out of it. I thought I was the only one who noticed. You're not, Harry said. Ron was watching this exchange with the expression of someone watching a tennis match in a language they mostly understood. Neville was watching it with the expression of someone relieved that other people were talking so he didn't have to. The train lurched forward. The platform began to slide away through the window, and Harry watched it go and thought, for the second time that morning, I'm not looking back. They were 30 minutes out of London when the compartment door slid open and Draco Malfoy walked in. He had two large boys behind him who walked the way large boys tend to when they've been told their job is to look large, and he had the expression Harry had already categorized from his one brief interaction with Lucius, that particular Malfoy combination of genuine intelligence and performed superiority that was its own kind of armor. He looked at the compartment. His gaze moved through Hermione, over Neville, past Ron, and landed on Harry with the focus of a compass needle. Harry Potter, he said. I'd heard you were on the train. Draco Malfoy, Harry said. Your father mentioned you. Sit down if you want. Draco blinked. He'd clearly expected either nervousness or hostility, and Harry had given him neither, which briefly displaced him. He covered it well, stepping in and taking the seat beside Ron, who shifted with the expression of someone who had opinions about this seating arrangement but was choosing not to voice them at this particular moment. My father spoke about the Wizengamot session, Draco said, settling himself with the precision of someone for whom physical composure is a studied habit. I imagine he did. He was impressed. Draco delivered this with the tone of someone accustomed to their father's impression being significant currency. Then, with a shift that Harry recognized as an attempt at genuine rather than performed interest, the betrothal to Greengrass was clever. Neutral house, enough Wizengamot weight, politically uncontroversial. Daphne is more than a political calculation, Harry said. Draco looked at him, not quite sure what to do with that. But you're right that it was strategically sound, Harry added. Is that what your father sent you to tell me? That he was impressed? He didn't send me, Draco said, with a flash of something that was probably honest, a flicker of the boy rather than the air. I wanted to see for myself. Harry looked at him steadily. He thought about Lucius in the ministry corridor. I'm curious what you're building. He thought about what Cyrus had said, the dark adjacent families would see an opportunity and push. Draco was pushing right now, but he was doing it in the only vocabulary he'd been given, which was transaction and status and alliance. What do you see? Harry asked. Draco was quiet for a moment. Whatever he saw, he was deciding whether to say it honestly. Someone who knows what he wants, he said finally. I do. Harry looked at him without hostility and without warmth, just direct and clear. I'm building something that isn't the light faction and isn't a resurrection of the dark. I think that project is better for everyone in this country, including your house. But I won't be managed, Draco, and I won't be an accessory. Whatever your father is hoping for, my father hopes for many things, Draco said, a little stiffly. I know. And I'm not telling you we can't be useful to each other. I'm telling you the terms. Harry let that settle for a moment. You're smart. I could use someone smart around me who knows how pureblood society works from the inside, and who has reason to think carefully about whether the old dark faction serves your family's actual interests or just its reputation. The compartment had gone very quiet. Draco looked at Harry with an expression that was hard to read, layers of practiced composure with something more complicated underneath. You just told me you're recruiting me without offering me anything. I offered you honesty, Harry said. In my experience that's rarer than it should be. Draco was quiet for another moment. Then he stood, and his large companions stirred. I'll think about it, he said, which coming from a Malfoy was approximately equivalent to enthusiasm. Take your time, Harry said. We've got 7 years. Draco left. The door clicked shut behind him. Ron Weasley let out a breath like a deflating balloon. Bloody hell, he said. Ron, Hermione said, reflexively. No, really, bloody hell. Harry looked at him. Ron Weasley had bright eyes and a quick face and was clearly, underneath the performance of it, paying attention to everything. What do you think of him? Harry asked. Ron looked surprised to be asked. Draco? He made a face. He's Malfoy. My family and his don't, I know your families don't get on. What do you actually think of him? Ron chewed on this. I think he's not as sure of himself as he acts, he said, after a moment. And I think he actually liked what you said, which makes me uncomfortable, but, he shrugged, there it is. Harry nodded. He filed Ron Weasley away as someone worth knowing well, genuinely perceptive when the performance dropped, loyal to a fault which was both his best quality and his most dangerous one, and deeply uncomfortable with anything that disrupted the pattern of who he'd been told was good and who he'd been told was bad. That was going to be a friction point. Harry intended to be patient with it. Sorry, Hermione said. She was looking at Harry with an expression that had shifted in the past 30 minutes from evaluative to something more open. Can I ask, the Wizengamot session the prophet wrote about? Was that you? Yes. You stripped Dumbledore of a proxy vote, she said, and her voice had the tone of someone who has spent 48 hours thinking about something and has assembled a very long list of questions. At age 10. Nearly 11, Neville said, quietly. Hermione glanced at him. Why does that keep coming up? People keep saying 10 like it's more shocking than 11, Harry said. I find it mildly annoying. Hermione looked at him for a moment, then made the same kind of sound Daphne had made on the bus, not quite a laugh, surprised out of her. Fair, she said. Can I ask why? Because Dumbledore having a proxy vote over my family's seat while I was growing up with the Dursleys and had no idea it was happening seemed like the kind of thing I should address, Harry said. And because the legal mechanism to address it was available to me. The betrothal declaration. Yes. Hermione processed this with the visible intensity of a very fast processor being given something to actually run. And Daphne Greengrass agreed to this. We negotiated it together. Harry thought it was important to say that. It benefits both houses. We both understand what it is. What is it? Hermione asked. Harry thought about this for a moment, about the afternoon in the Greengrass sitting room, about the not-laugh sounds and the thumb pressing against her hand and the careful way she'd said I wanted it. It's a partnership, he said. Between two people who understand the game and decided to play it together. Hermione looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned back to her book and said, I want to meet her. You will, Harry said. She's going to Hogwarts. I know. I mean I want to properly meet her. I want to see if she thinks the way you do. She's better at it than I am, Harry said honestly. She's been doing it her whole life. Hermione looked up again, like she was rechecking a sum and getting the same answer. You're not competitive about that. Why would I be? She's on my side. Harry looked out the window at the countryside rolling past, green and wide open, nothing like London. Being on the same side as someone smarter than you is an advantage, not an insult. Hermione closed her book. She looked at Neville, who had been listening to all of this with the focused attention of someone who had discovered a radio station he could actually understand. This is going to be a strange year, she said. Probably, Neville agreed, with a kind of peaceful acceptance that Harry found genuinely charming. The lunch trolley came an hour later and Harry bought enough food to feed 3 people and distributed it without making a point of it, because Neville had the careful way of eating that Harry recognized from years of not having enough, and Ron had the kind of appetite that came from a large family where you learned to eat when food was available. They talked about Hogwarts, what they'd read, what they expected, whether the moving staircase was as disorienting as described. Ron had the advantage of having 5 older brothers who had given him detailed intelligence of varying accuracy. Neville had read the library books about Hogwarts 3 times and remembered everything about herbology greenhouses and almost nothing about anything else. Hermione had a list. She showed it to Harry without being asked, which he thought was its own kind of trust. He suggested 3 additions from things he'd read that hadn't made her list, and she wrote them in with the focused efficiency of someone upgrading a system, and Ron watched this with an expression of dawning resignation. Are you 2 going to be in every advanced class together for 7 years? He asked. Probably, Harry said. Probably, Hermione agreed, at the same moment, and they both looked at each other slightly surprised. Ron put his head against the window and closed his eyes. They were somewhere in Scotland, the light going long and golden over the hills, when the compartment door opened again and Daphne Greengrass leaned in. She was in traveling robes, her hair still up from the morning, and she looked at the compartment occupants with a brief, cataloging look that Harry recognized as her default mode for new situations. Potter, she said. Greengrass. Harry moved over. Come in. She stepped inside, and the dynamic in the compartment shifted in the way it does when someone with a strong gravitational field enters a small space. Ron sat up straighter. Neville held Trevor slightly more carefully. Hermione looked at Daphne with the same evaluative intensity she'd turned on Harry 2 hours ago. Hermione Granger, Daphne said. Hermione looked surprised. You know my name? I know most of the names in this year. You're Muggleborn, top of the primary school academic record, first-generation witch. A pause. Those aren't criticisms. I looked into who was starting this year because it seemed useful. She sat down beside Harry with the composed inevitability of someone settling into a chair they'd already decided was theirs. I looked into you too, Hermione said. Good. Daphne looked at her steadily. What did you find? Heir to House Greengrass. Formally neutral. Academic record from a wizarding primary indicating exceptionally strong spell theory, moderate practical, excellent memory. Hermione tilted her head. You've been taught everything through a political lens. I was taught everything through every lens simultaneously, Daphne said. The political one is just the one that's most visible in print. Something in Hermione's expression shifted upward, recognition, one precise mind meeting another that worked differently. Fair, she said, which was the same word she'd said to Harry 2 hours ago, and Harry noted that it was Hermione's particular version of approval. Neville Longbottom, Daphne said, looking at him with a gentler register than she'd used with Hermione. I know your grandmother. Neville looked slightly alarmed. She didn't say anything, I didn't know, she didn't send me. I'm just saying I know her, and she thinks well of your herbology. Daphne's voice was still precise but the edge was gone from it. You'll be good at Hogwarts. Neville blinked. Did she say that? She didn't need to. Daphne looked at him plainly. You came in here with Harry and sat with people you'd never met and listened to everything and contributed when you had something to say and didn't perform anything. That's a more useful quality at Hogwarts than quick wand work. Neville looked like he wasn't sure whether to be surprised or grateful, and landed somewhere between the two. Ron Weasley, who had been watching Daphne with the expression of someone watching a foreign film without subtitles and trying to follow along, said, "What about me?" Daphne looked at him. "Ronald Weasley. 6 in the family. Your brothers are Fred, George, Bill, Charlie, and Percy, in descending order of relevance to whatever's about to happen in Wizarding Britain." A pause. "Fred and George will be genuinely useful allies. Percy will work against us at some point, not out of malice but out of institutional loyalty. I'd be friendly with the twins." Ron stared at her. "You just told me my own family. I told you how to think about your own family, which is different." Ron started. "Then, that's actually fair about Percy." Harry looked out the window. The hills were darker now, the light thinner. He could feel the evening coming. "Draco came by," he said to Daphne. "I know. He came to find me too, after." She didn't look surprised. "What did he say?" "That Potter was either going to be very important or very dead within the year, and that he hadn't decided which yet." She said it without drama, like someone reporting weather. "I told him that was a false binary and that important and dead were not mutually exclusive." "What did he say to that?" "He laughed. Which was interesting." She was quiet for a moment. "He's not irredeemable. He's been given a very narrow vocabulary for the world. If he encounters enough evidence that contradicts it, he has the intelligence to adapt." "Or he digs in," Ron said, darkly. "That's also possible," Daphne said. "People are complicated. You sound like you're talking about a transfiguration problem." "I think about people the same way I think about transfiguration," she said. "You can't change someone's fundamental nature. You can only change the conditions they're operating in and see what they choose." The compartment was quiet for a moment. Hermione was watching Daphne with an expression that had passed through evaluation and arrived somewhere that looked a lot like respect and wasn't entirely comfortable with itself yet. Harry noticed that and thought it would resolve itself naturally, and that when it did, Hermione and Daphne were going to be formidable. "We should probably change into robes," Neville said, which was both practically correct and a perfect tension break, and everyone agreed. They arrived at Hogsmeade Station in full dark, the night air sharp and smelling of pine and lake water. Harry climbed out onto the platform and looked up at the castle on the hill, lit windows, towers against a star-dense sky, more real than he'd imagined and at the same time exactly as real as he'd imagined, like seeing a painting you know by heart come into 3 dimensions. He stood there for a moment. "First years." The voice was enormous and warm and came attached to Hagrid, who was holding a lamp and grinning. "First years, over here." Harry walked over. Hagrid's face broke into something close to emotional when he saw him. "Harry. All right? Good train?" "Very good," Harry said, and meant it. "Right, then. Boats are this way." The boats were small and moved on their own across a black lake that reflected everything above it, the stars, the lit castle, the silver thread of a nearly full moon. Harry sat in a boat with Neville and Hermione and watched the castle approach and thought about very little, just the size of it and the fact that he was here. Neville was looking at the castle with his mouth slightly open. "Big," he said. "Very," Harry agreed. "My dad went here," Neville said quietly. "And my mum." Harry didn't say anything. He just sat with that beside Neville for a moment, because some things didn't need a response, they just needed a witness. The entrance hall was stone and candlelight and a teacher Harry recognized from his reading, Professor McGonagall, Transfiguration, Deputy Headmistress, the kind of severe competence that was its own kind of reassurance. She looked them over with the practiced eye of someone who had assessed 4 decades of 11-year-olds and found most of them roughly equivalent and all of them more nerve-wracking than they needed to be. "You will be sorted into your houses shortly," she said. Your house will be like your family while you're here. The 4 houses are Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin. She paused. I expect you to behave. She left them in the entrance hall to wait, and the assembled first years looked at each other with various combinations of excitement and dread. Harry looked at the ceiling, which was high and vaulted and had 4 hourglasses in the wall that he presumed tracked the house points. He looked at the doors into what was presumably the Great Hall. He thought about the Sorting Hat, and Daphne's words on the platform, trust your own judgment, and he thought about all the reading and all the thinking and all the long careful years of understanding, and he thought about who he was. He was a Potter, which meant Gryffindor by tradition. But tradition wasn't destiny. He was also, if he was honest with himself, deeply strategic, deeply ambitious, deeply patient. The Sorting Hat would see all of it. He'd read about the Sorting Hat in A History of Hogwarts. It was a genuine sentient artifact, one of the most complex magical objects in existence, and it didn't just see your qualities, it talked to you. Consulted you. Was influenced, the book suggested, by your own strong preferences. Harry had a preference. He intended to be clear about it. McGonagall returned and led them into the Great Hall, and Harry walked in beside Neville and looked up at the enchanted ceiling, stars and cloud, dark and alive, and thought, all right, then. Let's begin. The Hat's song was theatrical and thorough and gave him a complete map of what each house valued, which was useful confirmation rather than new information. Then McGonagall began reading names. Bones, Susan, Hufflepuff. Boot, Terry, Ravenclaw. Finch-Fletchley, Justin, Hufflepuff. Granger, Hermione. The hat went on her head and took perhaps 4 seconds. Gryffindor, it announced, and Hermione walked to the Gryffindor table with her back very straight and her chin up, and Harry thought she looked both terrified and like she'd been waiting for this her entire life. Greengrass, Daphne. Daphne walked to the stool with the same movement she brought to everything, contained, deliberate, claiming the space rather than just occupying it. The hat went on. A pause. Slytherin. She walked to the Slytherin table without looking at Harry. She sat down with her back to the room. Longbottom, Neville. Neville went up clutching Trevor so hard the toad made a sound. The hat took 30 seconds, longer than most, and then called Gryffindor, and Neville's shoulders dropped about 4 inches with pure relief. Malfoy, Draco, Slytherin, said the hat, before it had fully settled on his head. Draco walked to the Slytherin table looking satisfied, and Harry noticed he looked once toward the Gryffindor area before sitting, not at Harry but at the table, like he was checking something. Potter, Harry. The Great Hall went very quiet. Not the polite quiet of normal attention, a different kind, the kind that meant everyone in the room was looking at the same thing at once. Harry walked to the stool with exactly the same pace he'd used for the Wizengamot chamber floor, because the walk you practiced was the walk you had, and he'd practiced one that said, I know where I'm going. He sat down. The hat descended over his eyes. Darkness. And then a voice, old, dusty, thoughtful, and immediately, genuinely interested. Well now. A pause. I haven't had a conversation like this one is going to be in quite some time. I can see you've already thought about this. I have, Harry said, inside his own head. You do well in Slytherin. The ambition is real, the patience is genuine, the strategic thinking is among the best I've seen in a first year in, I know. But I need to tell you something. A considering silence. Go on, then. My betrothed is in Slytherin. My best strategic asset going into Hogwarts is already sitting at that table. If I'm in Slytherin with her, we're one unit in one place and every faction in this school immediately starts building counterpositions. Harry kept his thinking clear and direct, the same way he'd written the letter to Cyrus. If I'm somewhere else, we're 2 nodes of the same network with access to 2 different environments. We get more information. We have more reach. We're harder to contain. A pause that felt amused. You're making a political argument to me. It's the correct argument. It is, yes. Another pause, longer. And where do you want to go? Harry thought about Hermione and her annotated book and the look on her face when she found someone who thought like her. He thought about Neville saying my dad went here over a black lake. He thought about his father's face in the photograph, laughing in a garden. Gryffindor, he said. But not because of my parents. Because the people I want beside me are going there. The hat was quiet for what felt like a full 5 seconds. Then Gryffindor it is, it said, with the definitive satisfaction of a very old thing that had been surprised. Good luck, Harry Potter. You're going to need rather less of it than everyone thinks. Gryffindor, the hat announced. The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry took the hat off and handed it back to McGonagall and walked to the table and sat down beside Neville, who was grinning, and Hermione, who was clapping with genuine enthusiasm, and Fred and George Weasley somewhere further down the table shouted something that got them both a look from Percy. Harry looked across the hall. At the Slytherin table, Daphne was sitting straight and still and looking at the ceiling, apparently unconcerned with the sorting. But her thumb was moving against her hand. Harry looked back at his plate and felt something settle in his chest that had been suspended all day. The food appeared and the noise levels climbed back to something appropriate for a large medieval hall full of children who hadn't eaten since the train. Ron arrived at the Gryffindor table looking relieved at his own sorting and dropped into a seat near Harry with the natural ease of someone who had decided a week ago that they were going to be friends. Gryffindor, Ron said happily. Knew it. Your whole family is Gryffindor, Hermione said. Exactly. Knew it. Neville was eating with the relaxed energy of someone from whom a significant weight had been removed. He fed Trevor a piece of lettuce under the table, and Trevor accepted it with the regal composure of a toad that had been through worse. Harry ate and looked at the staff table. Dumbledore was seated at the center. He looked, as always, benevolently serene, the kind of serene that was genuine because it was genuinely earned, because he was a man who had thought more deeply about more things than most people alive. He caught Harry's eye once during the meal and smiled warmly. Harry smiled back. Next to Dumbledore was a woman with a severe bun who must be McGonagall, already back at the staff table. A large, cheerful man in green robes who was probably Sprout, given the soil under his fingernails. And at the end of the table, slightly removed, a man in a turban who was looking at his food with the concentrated study of someone who is trying very hard not to look at something else. He looked at Harry once, quickly, with an expression that was strange and layered and made Harry's scar give one sharp, brief prickle. Harry filed that away under things to investigate immediately. Dumbledore's welcome speech was warm and full of gentle good humor, and Harry listened to all of it and took careful note of several things. The prohibition on the third-floor corridor, a most painful death to those who go there said cheerfully, which was an interesting combination. The general welcome. The specific look of paternal pleasure that settled onto Dumbledore's face when he looked at the Gryffindor table, and at Harry specifically. A man who believes he is protecting you, Harry thought. A man who genuinely cares. And who wants you exactly where he can see you. He looked back with an expression of polite interest and gave nothing away. After dinner, Percy Weasley led the first-year Gryffindors through moving staircases and portraits and the specific geographic chaos of a castle that had been added to by multiple architects over multiple centuries. Hermione navigated by internal map. Harry watched her turning slightly at each junction like she was confirming directions she'd already memorized from a floor plan. He thought he'd seen a floor plan of Hogwarts in one of the books at Flourish and Blots and resolved to find a better one. The Gryffindor common room was warm and red and full of noise, older students reassembling after summer, first years arriving with the stunned energy of the newly sorted. Harry looked at it and thought, this is home for 7 years. Choose it properly. The boys' dormitory is up the stairs on the left, Percy said, with the earnest authority of someone for whom the words prefect and self were basically synonymous. Thanks, Harry said, and went up. The dormitory had 5 beds, his, Neville's, Ron's, and 2 others who turned out to be Dean Thomas and Seamus Finnegan, both of whom were already in a lively argument about whether the ceiling of the Great Hall was enchanted with a genuine sky or a recording. Harry put his trunk at the foot of his bed, freed Hedwig, who immediately claimed the best window and gave everyone a look that established her territorial position, and sat on the edge of the mattress for a moment. Neville was carefully putting Trevor in a little box by his bed with the focused attention of someone settling a small child. "Neville," Harry said. You did well today." Neville looked up. "I didn't really do anything." "You showed up," Harry said. "That's usually most of it." Neville looked at him for a moment, then nodded, and something in the careful set of his face relaxed into something younger and more honest. Ron was unpacking with the cheerful disorganization of someone from a large family who had learned early that systematic approaches were aspirational. "What do you think potions will be like?" he said to the room. "Difficult," Hermione said from the doorway of the girls' corridor, which technically she wasn't supposed to be in but which none of them pointed out. "Snape is. There's a lot written about his teaching methods." "His teaching methods are supposed to be terrifying," Ron said. "Challenging," Hermione corrected. "There's a difference." "I'm fairly sure in this context there isn't," Seamus said. Harry looked at the window, at the dark sky and the reflection of the common room fire in the glass, and thought about the man in the turban and the prickle in his scar, and thought about the third-floor corridor, and thought about a footnote in a history book about the prophecy archive. He thought, there is more happening in this building than lessons. He thought, good. He lay back on the bed with his eyes open and let the voices of his dormitory settle around him, and for the first time in his life felt the specific warmth of being exactly where he'd chosen to be. Outside, the Scottish night was wide and cold and enormous. Inside, Hedwig ruffled her feathers and looked at him from the window with the ancient, patient regard of an owl that knew perfectly well what was coming and had decided that was all right. Harry closed his eyes. Let it come, he thought. Chapter 4, The Ice Queen's curriculum. The first morning at Hogwarts arrived with grey Scottish light through tall windows and the smell of stone and candle smoke, and Harry was awake before anyone else in the dormitory. He lay still for a moment, listening to the sounds of the castle, distant, settling, old. Somewhere far below, a door opened and closed. Hedwig was asleep on her perch, her head tucked under one wing with the regal composure of an owl that kept its own hours. Ron was making a sound that wasn't quite snoring but was definitely communicating something. Neville had pulled his blanket up over his head at some point in the night and had not moved since. Harry got up, dressed, and went down to the common room. It was empty. The fire had burned low but was still going. He suspected it never actually went out, and the red and gold of the room looked different without people in it, less like a common room and more like the inside of something alive. He sat in the chair nearest the window and pulled out a small notebook he'd bought at the Diagon Alley stationery shop and wrote down everything he'd observed the previous night in the order it had happened. The turban. The scar. The third-floor corridor. He drew a small horizontal line between those 3 items and looked at what they produced. Not a conclusion, nowhere near enough data. But the beginning of a question that he intended to answer. He wrote one more thing: Dumbledore knows something is in the school and chose not to announce it properly. Then, why? Not why hide it, the answer to that was obvious enough, he didn't want a panic. The real question was why put it there? In a school. With several hundred children. He put the notebook away when he heard footsteps on the stairs. Hermione came down with her hair only slightly more organized than the night before and her first day timetable already in her hand. She looked at Harry in the chair and said, "How long have you been up?" "Hour, maybe." "What were you doing?" "Thinking." She sat down across from him and looked at her timetable. "We have Transfiguration first. Then Charms. Potions is Thursday." She paused. "I'm nervous about potions." "Don't be," Harry said. "Read the practical notes again before class and double-check your preparation steps." Snape will look for errors in process more than errors in result. Hermione looked at him. How do you know how Snape teaches? He published a paper in Practical Potions Quarterly in 1986 about the importance of preparation methodology. It's in the library, or it should be. It was referenced in a library index one found in one of the supplementary texts. He paused. He cares about precision above everything. If your process is correct, even if your result is imperfect, he'll respect it more than a good result from sloppy method. Hermione stared at him. You read his academic papers. I read everything. She looked at her timetable for a long moment. Then she said, I'm going to need that library index. I'll write you a copy this afternoon. Transfiguration was in a classroom on the 3rd floor, not the locked corridor, but nearby, which Harry noted, and Professor McGonagall was already at the front when they arrived, which was 3 minutes early and which McGonagall acknowledged with one precise nod that communicated both approval and the information that she expected it every time. She turned a desk into a pig and back again as her opening statement, which Harry thought was an excellent way to start a class, demonstrate the destination before you describe the journey. Then she distributed matchsticks and instructed them to attempt the basic transformation. Harry looked at the matchstick. He'd read everything he could find about the theory of transfiguration, the principle of impossible transformation, Gamp's law, the classification systems of animate and inanimate objects. He understood, conceptually, what he needed to do. The mental architecture required, holding the target image with complete clarity while directing magical will through the wand in a specific motion while maintaining, he pointed his wand. The matchstick became a needle. Not all the way, it still had a faint reddish tinge at the head, like it was uncertain, but the shape was correct, the metal was real, and when he picked it up it had the weight and cool smoothness of an actual sewing needle. He looked at it for a moment. McGonagall was there in under 5 seconds. She picked up the needle, examined it, set it back down with an expression that contained several things none of which she was going to say right now. 10 points to Gryffindor, she said. The head is still slightly colored. Work on the complete transformation. Harry worked on the complete transformation. By the end of class it was a perfect needle. Hermione got about halfway, the shape correct, the material still partially wood, and looked at it with the focused frustration of someone who knew exactly what she'd done wrong and was already correcting it in her head. You held the image of the wrong needle, Harry said as they were packing up. You thought about a needle instead of the specific needle you wanted. Transfiguration needs particularity. Hermione looked at him. How do you know what I was thinking? I could see your wand movement slow at the point where the visualization has to sharpen. You were casting on a general concept. He put his wand away. Think about the exact weight, the exact sheen. The more specific, the easier. She looked at him for a long moment. That's actually very helpful, she said, in the tone of someone who finds receiving help mildly disorienting. I know, he said, and picked up his bag. He found Daphne after lunch on the second day, in the library. She was at a table in the section between History of Magic and Magical Theory, with 2 books open and notes in her precise handwriting spread across several pages. She didn't look up when he sat down across from her, which he took as permission. He pulled out his charms reading and worked through it. After about 10 minutes she said, without looking up, first transfiguration class. Perfect needle by the end. A pause. First try. Mostly first try. She looked up now, with the specific expression she had when her data set was being updated. How? Theory. I knew what I was trying to do before I tried. He looked at her steadily. How was potions? Yesterday. Snape favors Slytherin in his points assessments, which was expected. He is genuinely excellent at teaching precision, which was also expected. She paused. He looked at your seat when he called your name for the register. When you weren't there he made a note. Of course he did. Harry had expected that. Snape and his father, he'd read about it, the broad strokes at least, and what he'd read told him that Snape carried old grievances the way some people carried old injuries, with a particular kind of practiced accommodation that had become so natural they no longer noticed the limp. "I'll need to be very clean in potions. No errors in process. He'll still mark you harder than your work deserves. Probably. I'll make sure the work is good enough that it doesn't matter." He looked at her notes. "What are you working on?" "An extension of the charms theory from this morning." Flitwick's explanation of the charm-to-object interaction was incomplete. She turned a page. "The standard theory treats the wand as a conduit. But the better model is that the wand is an amplifier, the magic is already in the caster, the wand shapes and focuses it. The implications for wandless casting are significant, yes." Harry leaned forward slightly. "I found a reference to it in the Advanced Charms Index. There's a text called Old and Forgotten Bewitchments that apparently addresses it. Not in the student section. Restricted? Not formally. Just not shelved where students tend to look." He glanced at the shelves. "Third aisle from the left, high up." Daphne looked at the third aisle from the left, then looked at him. "You've already been through the library." "Yesterday evening. We arrived yesterday evening. I got up early." He paused. "You've been up since 5. How?" She stopped. Looked at his eyes. "I look tired." "You look like someone who got 6 hours when they're used to 8. Which means something interrupted your sleep. The most likely thing is you spent a few hours planning rather than sleeping." He kept his voice neutral, not pointed. "What were you planning?" She was quiet for a moment. Not evasive, actually thinking about whether to say it. He'd learned already that her silences were categorically different from anyone else's and that wading through them was always worth it. "Dumbledore came to the Slytherin table last night after dinner," she said. "Briefly. He spoke to a few of the older students. Then to me." Harry's attention sharpened. "What did he say?" "He welcomed me to Hogwarts. He said he hoped I was settling in well. He said," a pause, "that he was pleased to see young people from different houses forming meaningful connections, and that he thought House Greengrass's involvement with House Potter showed great wisdom." Harry heard what she wasn't saying. He was validating the arrangement. Yes. In a way that implied he'd decided to work with it rather than against it. Which means, he's looking for the angle where it serves him. Harry leaned back. He can't dissolve the betrothal and he can't take the proxy vote back. So he's pivoting to positioning himself as supportive of it, which gives him the appearance of being on our side while he looks for the actual leverage point. Yes. Daphne looked at him. He's also, and I want to be fair about this, he was genuinely kind. He asked how my sister was, which means he's familiar with my family in detail. He remembered that she had a cold at Christmas 2 years ago, apparently from a conversation with my father at a ministry event. That's impressive memory. Or impressive filing system. She closed one of her books. The point is that he is not the cartoon villain version. He is a very intelligent man making what he believes are correct decisions, and he can be genuinely warm while doing it. That's more difficult to defend against than hostility, Harry said. Yes. She paused. That's the second time that observation has come up. Because it keeps being the most important one. They sat with that for a moment, the library quiet around them. He'll try to reach you through people you trust, Daphne said finally. Granger. Longbottom. The Weasley boy. I know. Harry had already thought about this. Not because they're disloyal, they're not, I can tell already. But because he can offer them things they want. Recognition, guidance, access. He genuinely likes students who work hard. He paused. I'm not going to try to isolate them from him. That would be both wrong and counterproductive. Then what? Make sure they know me well enough to tell the difference between information they're getting from him and information they're getting from their own observation. He looked at her steadily. The best protection against a narrative is knowing someone well enough to write your own. Daphne looked at him for a moment with an expression he was beginning to recognize, the one that happened when he said something she'd thought but hadn't put into words yet. "You do that a lot," she said. "Do what?" "Say the version of the thing that I was almost thinking." "Is that annoying?" "Sometimes," she said. "Not right now." He thought that might be progress. "I need you to teach me wizarding social customs," he said. "The ones you learn by being raised in it. I know the formal law and the political structure, but there are 1,000 things that I'll get wrong because nobody taught me and I didn't know what books to look for." She looked at him. "That's a significant admission." "I know. But it's true, and you already know it's true, so admitting it doesn't cost me anything and not admitting it costs me errors." A slight pause. "The formal title structure first," she said, pulling out a fresh sheet of parchment. "Then gift customs, because there will be an occasion before Christmas when you need them. Then dining protocols, because we will inevitably have a political dinner before the year is out." She uncapped her pen. "The formal title structure has 3 tiers, wait," Harry said. He pulled out his own parchment. "Go ahead." She looked at him for a half-second, something moving through her expression that was too quick to catch cleanly, and then she started talking, and Harry started writing, and outside the library windows the Scottish afternoon went long and gold over the grounds, and neither of them noticed. The first potions class was on a Thursday morning in the dungeons, which were cold and lit by torchlight and had the particular atmospheric intensity of a room that knew it was atmospheric. Snape entered without preamble. He was in black robes, dark-haired, and moved through the classroom with the specific economy of someone who found the world generally insufficient. He stood at the front and surveyed them in silence for a moment, and Harry noted the quality of that silence, not theatrical, genuinely evaluative. Then Snape began the register. He went through names with minimal inflection until he reached Potter. "Here, sir," Harry said. Snape looked at him. The look lasted approximately 3 seconds and contained, Harry thought, about 15 separate assessments. "Our new celebrity," he said, his voice cool and perfectly level. Harry said nothing. He kept his expression neutral and attentive, which was not the nervous nothing that students offered Snape out of fear but the specific attentiveness of someone who was listening because they actually intended to learn. He'd thought about how to handle Snape and decided that the correct approach was simple: be genuinely good at potions and don't flinch. Snape continued the register. Then he began to speak. He spoke about potions the way a man who had loved a subject for 30 years spoke about it. Underneath the cold delivery there was complete mastery, and underneath the mastery there was genuine reverence. Harry heard it immediately and found it interesting. Whatever else Snape was, he cared about this. "Potter," Snape said, during the lecture portion. "What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Harry had read this. "The draught of living death, sir." A fractional pause. "Where would you find a bezoar?" "Stomach of a goat. It can neutralize most poisons." "The difference between monkshood and wolfsbane?" "There isn't one. They're the same plant. Aconitum. Also called aconite." Harry paused. Although wolfsbane has specific applications in wolfsbane potion that the other names don't tend to be associated with, possibly because of the naming origin. Snape looked at him for a moment that was different from the earlier look. Not warmer, Snape's particular set of features seemed structurally resistant to warm, but different. "Recalibrating. 5 points to Gryffindor," he said, which had the quality of a man paying a debt he'd rather not but was too precise to avoid. He moved on. Hermione, who was sitting beside Harry, leaned fractionally toward him and breathed, "How did you know that last part about wolfsbane?" "Footnote in the herbology text," he breathed back, and she made a small sound of profound frustration at herself for missing a footnote. When they were actually brewing, a simple boil cure, basic preparation, Harry worked through the process with the same careful attention he'd given to transfiguration, following each step exactly as specified rather than anticipating. Snape moved through the classroom making observations, some of which were corrections, some of which were criticisms, and in one case, with a Slytherin girl named Millicent Bulstrode, something that was almost encouragement translated into Snape. He stopped at Harry's cauldron. Harry kept his attention on the precise chopping motion required for the dried nettles. Even size, the text had said. Consistency of surface area affected infusion rate. Snape watched him for 30 seconds. Harry could feel the quality of the attention. It was not waiting for an error, exactly, which was what he brought to most of the Gryffindors. It was something more complicated. "Your cuts are correct," Snape said, with the expression of a man tasting something he expected to be sour and finding it wasn't. "Don't overstir. The solution circles 3 times counterclockwise," Harry said, nodding. "Then 1 clockwise. The text says 4 counterclockwise but Libatius Borgia's original notes." He stopped, because he was about to reference something he'd found in a supplementary text that technically wasn't in the first-year syllabus, and he made a quick assessment of whether that served him here. He decided it did. "Borgia's original notes specify 3 and 1 for this base," he said. "The 4th counterclockwise was added in the 1978 edition for clarity, but it actually reduces the reaction quality slightly." Snape looked at him. "I read everything I could find over the summer," Harry said. "Sir." The silence lasted 4 seconds. Then Snape said, "Continue," and moved away, and Harry could not have said with certainty what the man's expression contained, but it was not what he'd started the class with. Hermione looked at Harry with an expression between impressed and scandalized. "You contradicted the textbook at Snape," she whispered. "I was right," Harry said. "That's not," she looked at her own potion. "Was he going to say you were right or take points?" "He took no points," Harry said. "So either I was right or he's filing it away to correct me later, in which case I'll find out then." He stirred 3 times counterclockwise. "I'm not going to pretend I don't know things because it's more comfortable." Hermione stirred her own cauldron with the expression of someone making a new rule for themselves. "Neither am I," she said quietly, and Harry thought she meant it. By the end of the second week, something had settled into a rhythm that Harry had learned to trust in himself, the shape of days finding their structure. Mornings, classes, where he worked with genuine focus and without performance. He did not hide what he could do. He answered questions when he knew the answers, which was most of the time, and asked questions when he didn't, which Hermione was starting to mirror, which was good. He sat near Neville in classes they shared and helped him with theory without doing his work for him, which was a balance he'd thought about and found important. Neville needed to build confidence through his own competence, not borrowed competence from Harry, and so Harry asked questions rather than giving answers, walked beside him rather than ahead. Afternoons, a rotating pattern, Quidditch trials he watched from the ground. He had no interest in trying out yet, there was too much to do, but he noted the dynamics of the team. Library sessions, one free period where he and Daphne had established an informal arrangement of meeting in the library that had not been formally agreed on and was therefore, by virtue of just happening, more honest than anything negotiated. She was teaching him. Not just the formal list she'd started in the first library session, though that continued, systematic and useful. But the other things. The observation-based things. "That's Barnabas Avery," she said one afternoon, looking at a fourth-year boy who had just hexed a second year in a corridor and was now walking away with the confidence of someone who had never once had consequences. "His father is on the Wizengamot. Light faction, technically, but he donated money to several families after the war who were subsequently cleared of Death Eater charges. The donation amounts correlate to the complexity of the charges. He bought the clearances," Harry said. "His father arranged them. Barnabas doesn't know the details. He just knows he can do things without consequences." She watched him round the corner. "He'll test you." "Not physically," He's not brave enough. Socially. He'll say something in earshot of witnesses. When? 2 weeks, maybe 3. He needs to assess the landscape first. She was calm about it the way you are calm about things you've been watching for years. When he does, don't argue. Don't defend. Just make clear you know who he is and what his father did and that one or both of those things has already been noted. You don't need to say it directly. He'll hear it. Harry thought about this. You learned this by watching your father. I learned it by being in the room when my father conducted business since I was 5, she said. Same thing. Is it strange? Starting school when you already know all of this? She was quiet for a moment, and Harry had learned to let her quiet be what it needed to be. It's strange, she said finally, that the people who know nothing seem so sure they're safe. I'm not sure if I envy them or not. I don't envy them, Harry said. I was one. Being sure you're safe when you're not is just danger with extra steps. She looked at him sideways. The Dursleys. Yes. He said it evenly, because it was just a fact. I grew up not knowing anything. I'm making up for it. You're not making up for it, she said, quietly, and she said it the same way she'd said everything else about him, not gently, not with pity, but with a precision that meant she'd looked at the thing directly and was describing what she saw. You're building something new. That's different from making up for something. Harry looked at her. She was looking at the corridor where Avery had gone, her profile composed and clean in the afternoon light. Greengrass, he said. Potter. That's the kindest thing anyone said to me in approximately a decade. A pause. She turned and looked at him, and the expression on her face was complicated, guarded and open at the same time, which he was beginning to think was simply what Daphne Greengrass looked like when she wasn't performing anything. It's just accurate, she said. I know. That's why it's kind. She turned back to the corridor. Her thumb did the thing against her hand. Harry let it be. The first flying lesson was on a Thursday afternoon, and Harry arrived on the grounds with the calm interest of someone who has read extensively about flying and is curious how the theory will translate. What he had not fully accounted for was that the theory would translate immediately and completely, and that flying on a broomstick was, apparently, one of those things that his body understood without being asked. The moment the broom rose to his hand, something settled into place with the confidence of a key in a lock. When Madame Hooch told them to kick off, Harry kicked off, and the ground dropped away, and the wind came up around him, and he thought, oh. It was not like reading. It was not like thinking. It was something else, entirely physical, entirely present, not strategic or careful at all, just the clean animal fact of speed and air and height, and for perhaps the first time in his life Harry Potter experienced something completely without processing it. He flew. He went higher than he was supposed to. He didn't decide to, his body decided, and he let it, and the castle came into view below him in the late afternoon light, the lake silver, the grounds green, and he hung there for a moment at 200 feet with the wind in his face and didn't think about anything. Madame Hooch's whistle reached him from below. He came back down with the measured control of someone who had, just briefly, remembered they had responsibilities. Potter, Madame Hooch said, with an expression that was trying to be stern and not entirely managing it. You were told to stay at ground level. Yes, ma'am, Harry said. I apologize. You went to, she stopped. Looked at him. Have you flown before? No. She looked at him for another moment. Then she looked up at where he'd been and back at him. Natural, she said, to herself more than him, and wrote something in her notes. 10 points to Gryffindor. And stay at the height I specify, please. Yes, ma'am. Neville had not gotten off the ground and had, in fact, had a significant incident involving a gust of wind and the stone steps at the edge of the courtyard, and Harry went to sit beside him while his wrist was being assessed. You all right? Just scared it, Neville said, looking at his wrist. Madam Hooch says it's not broken. Good. Harry looked at the broom. The thing with flying is you have to stop trying to control it and start working with it. You're fighting the broom. The broom wants to throw me off, Neville said. The broom doesn't want anything. It responds to what you're feeling. If you're scared, you tense, and you give it contradictory inputs. He paused. Do you trust me? Neville looked at him. Yes. Get back on the broom. Neville looked at the broom. Then at his wrist. Then back at Harry. Then, with the expression of a person making a decision they were not entirely comfortable with, he picked up the broom. He didn't fly well. But he got off the ground, and he stayed at the correct height, and when he landed he looked at Harry with an expression that was somewhere between relief and genuine surprise at himself. Not thrown off, he said. Not thrown off, Harry agreed. The letter from Astoria arrived on a Saturday morning, delivered by an extremely self-important owl that landed on the Gryffindor breakfast table with the attitude of a bird that expected applause. The letter was 4 pages long, which Harry had not anticipated. The handwriting was Daphne's but smaller and rounder at the edges. It clearly came from the same education, the same careful formation, but it hadn't finished settling yet. Dear Harry Potter, it began. My sister said I shouldn't call you Lord Potter in a letter because that's only for formal correspondence and letters to people you don't know, and apparently you count as someone she knows now, which she said in a way that meant it was embarrassing to admit, but she was doing it anyway because accuracy is more important than comfort. This is something I think about her too, so you and I agree on this. I have read the Prophet article 4 times. My father says it was well handled. He doesn't say that about many things. He said something else about it which was in a language Daphne and I are not supposed to understand yet, but I am nearly 10 and I have been listening carefully for years. He meant that he was proud. He doesn't say that very often either. I have some questions which Daphne says are invasive but I think are reasonable. Question 1. Did you really read the whole betrothal clause in the charter by yourself? Question 2. Are you nice to Daphne or are you clever to her, because these are different things and she needs both but she won't ask for the nice part? Question 3. Trevor the Toad. Daphne mentioned it. Is he wise? Please write back. I am at home with tutors and it is very quiet. Astoria Isabel Greengrass, age 9 3/4. Harry read it twice and then looked up to find Hermione watching him read it with the particular expression of someone who was very interested in what the letter said and was professionally refraining from asking. It's from Astoria Greengrass, Harry said. Daphne's sister? Is she at Hogwarts? 2 years still. She's 9. He looked at the letter again. She needs both but she won't ask for the nice part. He thought about this at some length. She's perceptive. What does she say? She has questions. He considered them. Question 1 was easy. Question 3 required consulting Neville. Question 2 he sat with for a moment. Are you nice to Daphne or are you clever to her? He thought about the library, the afternoons, the way Daphne taught him things with the precision of someone who cared that he understood them properly. He thought about the way her posture changed over the course of a 2-hour study session, the careful squareness of her shoulders at the start, and by the end, the way she sat differently, less maintained. He thought about the thumb and the not laughs and the "it's just accurate" that she'd said when she didn't mean it's just accurate at all. He wrote back to Astoria that afternoon. 3 pages. He answered all 3 questions. Quirrell's defense against the dark arts classes were, technically, informative. The man knew his material, you could tell because the structure of the lessons made sense, the theory was sound, the content was selected with a coherence that indicated genuine understanding of the subject. The problem was the delivery. Quirrell taught through the turban with the nervous, deflecting energy of someone performing a personality rather than having one, and the stammer came and went in a way that felt inconsistent, more a barrier than a natural speech pattern. Harry watched him and took careful notes on the material and equally careful notes on the man. In the 3rd week, Quirrell's gaze had drifted to Harry during lectures 4 times in a single class. After the 4th time, Harry looked directly back at him, not challenging, just acknowledging. Quirrell looked away immediately and the stammer thickened for about 30 seconds. That evening, Harry added 3 lines to his small notebook. Q's stammer is a performance, at least partially. The inconsistency is too pronounced. The scar prickles have been strongest near the 3rd floor corridor and during data. He is afraid of something. Or afraid of being seen clearly. He closed the notebook and thought about what he knew about the 3rd floor corridor, the warning at the feast. A most painful death. Said cheerfully, because Dumbledore delivered difficult information warmly, which was itself an interesting habit. He thought about what Cyrus had said in the Leaky Cauldron. Dumbledore has been architecturally constructing the Wizengamot's decision-making apparatus for 15 years. A man like that didn't put dangerous things in schools without a reason. A man like that planned. Something valuable was being stored. Something was guarding it. And there was a man wearing a turban who looked at Harry like he was a problem to be solved. He needed more information. He went to find Daphne. She was in the library, which was where she was when she was working, and studying in the common room was where she was when she was not. Harry had learned this in the same way he'd learned everything about her, by paying attention and not making it obvious that he was. He sat down and said, "What do you know about what Dumbledore might be keeping in the school?" She looked up. "Why?" He told her. The scar, the corridor warning, Quirrell's inconsistent behavior. He laid it out in order, concisely, the way he would have written it in the notebook, and she listened with her full attention in the way she listened when something engaged her completely. "There was a break-in at Gringotts," she said, when he finished. "Mid-August. My father mentioned it. Vault 713, a Hogwarts vault. Empty when the thieves arrived," Harry said. He'd read about it in the Prophet. "Yes. Which means either the contents were moved beforehand or the information about the break-in was wrong." She paused. "Which means someone knew the break-in was coming. Or arranged it as a test," Harry said. Daphne looked at him. "That's a dark interpretation. It's not necessarily wrong." She was quiet for a moment. "Whatever it is in this building," she said. "And Quirrell is connected to it somehow. I don't know how yet." He looked at the table between them. "I'm not going to go charging at it. I don't have enough information." "Good," she said firmly. "But I'm going to watch. And I need to know who in Slytherin is watching Quirrell, because they are, I can tell from how the older students talk in the corridors." "Snape," Daphne said. "He watches Quirrell. I've observed it." She paused. "They don't like each other." Snape, she stopped, choosing something carefully. Snape applied for the defense position several times. He wanted it. There's professional frustration there. But the watching is more than professional frustration. It's vigilant. He suspects something too. Or he knows something. She looked at Harry steadily. If Snape and Dumbledore are both aware of a threat, and both are watching Quirrell, then the threat is real and they're managing it rather than eliminating it, Harry said. Which means eliminating it isn't the point. The point is something else. Daphne sat with this for a moment. "The Philosopher's Stone," she said, quietly. Harry looked at her. "It's the only thing I know of that would warrant a Gringotts vault and be worth hiding at Hogwarts under Dumbledore's protection." Her voice was very even. "Nicholas Flamel. He's been alive for 600 years. There's been speculation for decades that he was moved somewhere secure during the war and that his stone was held separately." She paused. "My father had dinner with a ministry official 3 years ago who said something oblique about Flamel's health. The context suggested contingency plans. The stone is the bait," Harry said. "Or the stone is what needs protecting and Hogwarts is the best protection available." She met his gaze. Both things can be true. Yes. He thought about Quirrell looking at him across a classroom. He thought about the scar. He thought about a very old entity and a very young one and a Dark Lord who had inconveniently not died. Daphne, he said. Don't. I haven't said anything. You were about to tell me that whatever Quirrell is involved with has something to do with Voldemort, she said. And you were going to watch my reaction when you said the name. Harry looked at her. Were you going to react? No, she said. Good. He held her gaze. He's not dead. I don't think he was ever dead. I think something happened that night that nobody has explained to me accurately yet. A pause. And I think Dumbledore knows significantly more about it than he's told anyone. Daphne looked at him for a long moment in the quiet library, in the late afternoon, with the light going gold and amber outside the tall windows. You're not afraid, she said. Should I be? Most people are. Most people haven't been living with the consequences of that night for 10 years, Harry said. Fear is useful when it tells you something's dangerous. It's not useful when you already know something is dangerous and the information stops there. She held his gaze for another moment. Then she looked down at her notes and said, very quietly, and in a tone that was so stripped of its usual composure that Harry noticed it immediately, "Be careful." It was 2 words. It was said the same way she'd said "I wanted it" in her father's sitting room, quickly, before she could change her mind. Harry looked at her bent head, the careful arrangement of her hair, the precise posture that was slightly less precise than usual. "I'm very difficult to damage," he said. "I've been practicing." "That's not the same as being careful." "No," he agreed. "But I'll work on it." She looked up then, and whatever was in her expression was there for about 1 full second before she put the composure back, but he saw it, something unguarded and real and genuinely worried. He noted it. He put it somewhere careful. "Now," she said, in her normal voice, "I want to discuss the 3rd floor corridor layout. I memorized the castle floor plan in the first week and there are several architectural inconsistencies on that level that suggest." "Show me," Harry said, and leaned forward, and they worked until the library closed. Chapter 5. The third faction. Lucius Malfoy arrived on a Wednesday in the 3rd week of November, which Harry knew because Draco mentioned it the day before with the particular combination of pride and anxiety that children display when a parent is visiting their world for the first time and they're not sure which version of themselves to be. "Governor's meeting," Draco said, in the corridor outside Transfiguration. He said it to Harry specifically, which meant something. In the 7 weeks since the train, Draco had been conducting what Harry recognized as a very careful personal assessment, present in the periphery, occasionally direct, processing whatever he decided to process at his own pace. He hadn't committed to anything. But he kept coming back, which was its own kind of answer. "I know," Harry said. Draco looked at him. "He'll want to speak with you." "I'm aware." "Are you going to meet with him?" Harry looked at Draco steadily. "I'll request a formal meeting. Daphne will be with me." He paused. "You're welcome to be there too, if you want." Draco blinked. Whatever he'd expected, that wasn't it. "Why would I? Because it concerns your house as much as mine," Harry said. "Because you've been making up your mind about something for 2 months and you might as well hear what I actually plan instead of what your father tells you I plan." He kept his voice even, not unkind. "And because I think you'd find it interesting." A long pause. "I'll think about it," Draco said, which Harry had come to understand was Draco for yes, "but I need time to pretend I considered alternatives." "Let me know by tonight," Harry said. "I'll send the meeting request this afternoon." He walked into Transfiguration and Draco stood in the corridor for another moment before following. The meeting request was 3 sentences on Hogwarts stationery, formally addressed to Lord Lucius Malfoy, requesting a private discussion at his earliest convenience during the governor's visit regarding matters pertaining to House Potter and allied interests. Harry signed it Harry J. Potter, Lord, House of Potter, and sent it with Hedwig, who delivered it to the governor's suite on the 4th floor and returned with a reply within 2 hours. Lord Malfoy would be pleased to meet with Lord Potter at 4 o'clock in the small reception room adjacent to the governor's meeting chambers. His response was 4 times as long as Harry's request and contained twice as little actual information, which Harry thought was a personality trait. He told Daphne at lunch. She looked at the reply, looked at the time, and said, "I need an hour before the meeting." To prepare? To change. She looked at him levelly. So do you. If you go in those robes, Lucius Malfoy will spend the first 10 minutes establishing dominance through tailoring. Harry looked down at his school robes, which were perfectly clean and correctly worn. They're fine. They are Hogwarts school robes, Daphne said. We are not attending a transfiguration class. We're the formal ones, the good black set, not the everyday. She looked back at her lunch. And do something with your hair. My hair doesn't do things. Then leave it, she said. But change the robes. Neville, across the table, was eating his lunch with the peaceful expression of a person watching a scene he found both educational and entertaining. When Harry looked at him he said, helpfully, "She's right about the robes." Harry changed the robes. At 3:55, Harry and Daphne walked through the 4th floor corridor toward the governor's suite. Daphne was in formal Greengrass robes, deep green, clean lines, the family crest at the collar embroidered small and precise, and she moved through the corridor the way she moved through everything, like the space was already hers. Harry was in the formal black set and had, after 3 minutes of attempting something different with his hair, decided that Daphne was right and left it. Draco was waiting outside the reception room. He was in formal robes, which told Harry he'd decided, and he was standing with his hands behind his back with the practiced posture of a boy who had been attending formal occasions since he could walk. He looked at them as they approached and something moved briefly across his face, not nervousness exactly, but the particular awareness of someone about to do something that cannot be undone. "You came," Harry said. "I said I'd think about it," Draco said. "You did." Harry stopped beside him. "Thank you." Draco looked at him for a moment, slightly displaced again by the directness of it, then composed himself. "Father doesn't know I'll be here. Does that matter?" "It will matter to him." A pause. "I've decided that's his problem." Harry looked at him steadily. In 7 weeks he'd watched Draco navigate Hogwarts with the specific challenge of a boy who had been given a complete map of a world that wasn't quite the territory, every piece of received wisdom from his father about houses and status and who was worth knowing was being field-tested against actual reality, and some of it was holding up and some of it was not, and the not holding up parts were clearly causing Draco more difficulty than he'd expected. He was smart enough to see the discrepancies. He was stubborn enough that seeing them was uncomfortable. But he was here. "Let's go in," Harry said. Lucius Malfoy was already in the reception room, standing near the window with a glass of something that was probably the governor's best offering. He was in formal robes that were, objectively, very good robes, deep grey with silver at the cuffs, the Malfoy crest in white gold at the collar. He looked at Harry when the door opened, and then at Daphne, and then, with a brief and carefully neutralized expression, at Draco. "Draco," he said. "This is a surprise." "Father," Draco said. "Good meeting?" "Productive." His gaze went back to Harry and Daphne. Something had already shifted in his bearing, not less confident, but recalibrated. He'd arrived expecting 2 people and found 3, which was a small thing, but small things told Lucius Malfoy accurate information. Lord Potter. Miss Greengrass. Lord Malfoy, Harry said. "Thank you for making time. Please sit." Lucius indicated the chairs arranged around a low table. They sat, Harry in the chair directly opposite Lucius, Daphne beside Harry, Draco beside his father but angled slightly outward in the unconscious geometry of someone who has not decided whose side of the table he's really on. "I confess," Lucius said, settling himself, "that when you told me in the ministry you were building options, I assumed you were being modest. I wasn't being modest, Harry said. I was being accurate. The options are still being built. What have you built so far? A political partnership with House Greengrass. Reclaimed the Potter seat's full standing in the Wizengamot. Established working relationships with several of the 14 persuadable votes in the neutral and independent tiers. Harry kept his voice even, not boasting, just presenting. I've spent the first term developing an understanding of who in this school will matter in 15 years and positioning myself accordingly. Lucius was quiet for a moment. The 14 votes is an interesting framework. You've done the same calculation. The dark faction has done that calculation for 20 years. A slight pause. The answer has generally been that those 14 votes are inaccessible because the families holding them have spent 20 years being courted by both sides and finding both sides wanting. They've collectively decided that engagement is more costly than neutrality. That's the problem I'm solving, Harry said. Lucius looked at him with an expression that contained several things in sequence: assessment, something close to amusement, and underneath both, a genuine attention that Harry recognized as the version of Lucius Malfoy that existed before the performance of him. You're 11 years old, he said. That's the second time someone has said that to me in a political context, Harry said. I'm starting to find it more interesting than irritating. What is it about my age that people think changes the analysis? Daphne made a sound beside him that was not quite a laugh. She covered it with a slight adjustment of her posture. What you're describing, Lucius said, is a third faction. A genuine centerblock with enough votes to decide any divided question in the Wizengamot. You understand what that means in practical terms. It means neither the light nor the dark can pass anything without our cooperation. It also means we can block anything either side tries to push that serves only their own interests rather than the country's. Harry paused. That's not a threat to anyone acting in good faith. It's only a threat to people who've been using the political structure for private ends. Lucius was quiet. The war cost your house, Harry continued. He said it plainly, without targeting it. Not in property, in standing. In trust. The families that backed Voldemort and survived have been operating with a credibility deficit for 10 years, working within Dumbledore's framework because there was no alternative framework to work within. The deficit compounds. In another 10 years it becomes structural. He looked at Lucius steadily. I'm offering an alternative framework. You're offering it to me, Lucius said. I'm describing it to you. What you do with the description is your decision. Harry kept his hands still in his lap. I'm not asking for Malfoy allegiance. I'm not asking for anything right now. I'm telling you what I'm building so that when it exists, you've had time to think about it. Lucius looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Daphne. Miss Greengrass. Your father is involved in this. House Greengrass is a partner, Daphne said. Not a vehicle. The distinction is important. Your father negotiated the terms himself? My father and Lord Potter negotiated together. I was present. Her voice was completely level. As I intend to be for every significant discussion going forward. Lucius looked at her for a moment, and Harry saw something in that look, a recognition, one political mind acknowledging another, with the slight additional quality that came from it being unexpected in an 11-year-old girl. You've chosen well, he said to Harry, in a tone that meant something more than the literal. I know, Harry said. Draco, who had been silent through all of this with the focused attention of someone watching a chess game and following the moves, said quietly, what about the dark families that won't cooperate? Bellatrix is still, he stopped. In Azkaban, Harry said. For now. He looked at Draco. That's a real concern. The people who followed Voldemort out of belief rather than self-interest aren't going to respond to a political framework. I know that. Then you have an enemy you can't negotiate with, Draco said. Yes. But I also have the difference between that enemy and the families who made choices under pressure and would make different ones given different conditions. He held Draco's gaze. I'm not asking people to confess to anything. I'm asking them to look at where they want to be in 15 years. Draco looked back at him for a long moment. Then he looked at his father. Lucius was watching Draco with an expression that was the most genuinely unguarded thing Harry had seen on the man's face since the ministry corridor, something careful and not entirely resolved. I need to think, Lucius said finally. He stood, which signaled the meeting was over, and Harry stood at the same moment, not a moment after, which maintained parity. Lord Potter. Miss Greengrass. A pause. Draco. Father, Draco said. They left the reception room in the amber-gray light of a November afternoon, and Draco walked beside Harry in silence for a corridor and a half before he said, he was impressed. He was thinking, Harry said. When my father looks like that, he's impressed. Draco was quiet for another moment. He won't commit to anything yet. He'll watch for another 6 months, probably a year. I know. That doesn't bother you? I have years, Harry said. I keep saying it because it keeps being true. Draco looked at him sidelong. You're strange, Potter. I've heard that. It's not an insult. I know. Daphne, on Harry's other side, said nothing. But Harry saw her expression in his peripheral vision and she was, quietly and without performing it, satisfied. Dumbledore's countermove came 4 days later. It arrived not as a confrontation but as an invitation, which Harry had expected. A note in his neat, distinctive handwriting asking if Harry might like to have tea with him on Saturday afternoon, just a chat, no particular agenda. Harry showed it to Daphne. She read it, set it down, and said, he's moving faster than I expected. Because of the Malfoy meeting, Harry said. Someone told him. Someone always tells him. She looked at the note. He'll be kind. He'll be interested in you as a person. He'll ask about the Dursleys. A pause. He knows about the Dursleys. I assumed. He's kept you there deliberately, she said, and said it with a flatness that meant she had already processed the anger and moved past it to utility. A boy who grew up isolated, uninformed, grateful, that's a boy who needs guidance, who accepts it naturally. Who doesn't ask awkward questions. She looked at him. You are the opposite of what he planned for. That's not his fault, Harry said. I made my own choices. It's absolutely his fault, Daphne said, with a brief precision that was the closest she came to heat in a political conversation. Then she looked back at the note. Go. You think I should go? I think you should sit in his office for an hour and let him be warm at you and tell you as little of substance as possible, and watch everything in the room, and come back and tell me what was on the shelves. She met his gaze. He'll show you things deliberately, the pensive, the portraits, the instruments. He wants you to find him impressive and safe. Let him believe it's working. And what do I actually learn from it? What he chooses to show you tells you what he wants you to focus on. What he doesn't show you tells you where the real information is. She paused. And there's a portrait of Phineas Nigellus Black in his office who was headmaster in the 1800s and who also has a portrait in the Black family home. He listens to everything and reports selectively. Harry looked at her. How do you know that? My mother is distantly connected to the Black family. There are portraits. She said it with the calm tone of someone for whom family political intelligence was simply a part of life. Be careful what you say within earshot of paintings in this school. Right. He folded the note. What do I want from the meeting? Confirmation that he knows about the stone. Watch his hands, he gestures when he's deciding what to omit. And see if he asks you directly about the Malfoy meeting. She looked at Harry levelly. If he does, he has better sources in Slytherin than I thought. If he doesn't, he's waiting to see if you'll volunteer it. He won't get it either way. No, she agreed. He won't. The gargoyle outside Dumbledore's office moved aside for him immediately, which Harry thought meant his name had been added to some approved list, which meant Dumbledore had planned this meeting for some time. He filed it away and climbed the spiral staircase. The office was everything Daphne had described: instruments, portraits, the pensieve in its cabinet, the familiar unfamiliar quality of a very old room in which a very old man had arranged things carefully. It smelled of something sweet and papery, like old books and lemon drops. Fawkes was on his perch. Harry stopped and looked at the phoenix for a moment. The bird looked back with enormous dark eyes, unhurried, with the quality of a creature that has seen several centuries of human difficulty and found it interesting rather than alarming. "He likes you," Dumbledore said, from behind his desk, with the warm note of a man who had expected the reaction and was pleased to have it confirmed. "He's remarkable," Harry said honestly, and sat in the chair opposite. Tea arrived, actually appeared on the desk, which Harry had known was possible from his reading but which was still satisfying to see. Dumbledore poured with the unhurried ease of a man conducting a ritual he found genuinely pleasurable. "How is the first term treating you?" he said. "Very well," Harry said. "I find the classes interesting. I understand you've made an excellent start." A warm glance over half-moon spectacles. "Professor McGonagall has mentioned you in staff meeting twice. I hope the mentions were positive." "Entirely." A pause. Professor Snape, rather characteristically, said nothing. Which from Severus is its own kind of endorsement. Harry smiled and said nothing, and let Dumbledore have the observation. They talked about classes for 10 minutes. Harry was genuine, he actually found the classes interesting, and talking about them honestly required no performance. Dumbledore listened with the full attention of a man who found young people interesting, which Harry thought was real rather than performed, and which made him significantly more effective than he would be if it were false. "I was delighted," Dumbledore said, after a natural pause, "to hear that you'd found such a good friend in young Neville Longbottom." Harry heard the step over something, the slight adjustment in direction, the beginning of an approach. "He's genuine," Harry said. "I value that." "His parents were very dear to many people," Dumbledore said, and his voice carried a real weight when he said it. Not performed sadness, actual sadness, for actual people he had actually known. Harry noted the difference. Frank and Alice were among the finest aurors the Ministry ever had. "I know." Harry met his gaze. "What happened to them is one of the reasons the work I'm doing in the Wizengamot matters. If the political structure had been less fractured, if the neutral bloc had been functional, it might not have prevented everything, but the aftermath might have been handled differently." A slight pause. Just a half-second, but Harry caught it. Dumbledore had not expected that. "A sophisticated analysis," he said, "for someone who's 11, Harry said, with a small smile. Dumbledore laughed. It was genuine. "Yes." He looked at Harry with an expression that was more direct than anything he'd shown yet, less performance, more actual regard. "You are considerably more prepared for this world than I anticipated, Harry. And I want you to know," a slight lean forward, "that this does not concern me. I find it, if anything, gratifying. You are exactly the kind of young man I hoped you might be." Harry listened to every syllable of that. "I hoped you might be." Present tense. "And the kind of young man I hoped for, not surprised by, hoped for." A slight reframing. "He has not lost," the framing suggested. "This is still within his expectations." "Thank you," Harry said, warmly. "I do hope," Dumbledore said, "that despite all your very impressive independence, you know that my door is always open. That whatever questions you have about your family, your history, about the night you received that scar, you can ask me." There it was. The real offer. The complete picture from the letter, brought into the room. Harry looked at him steadily. "I appreciate that very much," he said. I expect I'll have questions when I'm ready for the answers. When I'm ready. Not when you decide to tell me. The distinction was subtle and Dumbledore heard it. Harry saw it, just barely, a slight recalibration behind the warmth. They looked at each other across the tea tray for a moment, two people who understood each other precisely and were both behaving with complete courtesy. Of course, Dumbledore said. Harry looked at the shelves, as Daphne had told him to. Books, instruments, the portraits whose occupants were doing various things with varying degrees of interest. Phineas Nigellus Black was pretending to be asleep. Harry did not look at him long enough to seem aware he was interesting. He looked at the instruments, several doing things he couldn't identify, one tracking something with a thin silver needle, one with small mirrors that might have been related to something he'd read about protective enchantments. He looked at the cabinet that contained the pensieve and then away from it. He did not see evidence of the stone directly. But on the fourth shelf from the top, behind a plant that was doing something gentle and persistent with its tendrils, was a book with a worn red spine and the words N. Flammel, Alchemical Correspondences, Volume 3 half visible along the edge. Not the stone. But confirmation of the thinking. I should get back before dinner, Harry said, standing. Thank you for the tea. Thank you for coming. Dumbledore rose and walked him to the door with the genuine warmth of a host who has enjoyed an afternoon. At the door, Harry. Harry turned. Be careful, Dumbledore said, simply. The same two words Daphne had used. Different tone. Different meaning. I will, Harry said, and went down the stairs. He found Daphne in the library, which was where she was, and sat down and told her everything in order without embellishment. She listened, wrote 3 notes, and then said, Flammel's book. On the shelf. He put it there. Harry looked at her. Or it's always been there and he didn't think about it. Dumbledore thinks about everything in that room. She tapped the note. He showed you the book. He wanted you to find it. Harry sat back. Why? Because you're going to find out about the stone anyway, you're already thinking about it, and he knows you're thinking about it because he knows you. And a boy who discovers something himself is more manageable than a boy who discovers it was being hidden from him. She looked at him. He's inviting you into a partial confidence. Letting you see enough to make you feel informed. While keeping the part that matters, whatever the stone is actually for, she said. Why it's here. Why now? She was quiet. Did he ask about the Malfoy meeting? No. She nodded slowly. Good sources in Slytherin. He didn't need to ask. A pause. Or he decided not to show that he knows, which means he wants you to think his information is worse than it is. Both things can be true, Harry said, echoing what she'd said to him in the library 3 weeks ago. Both things are always true, she said, and almost smiled. 3 days later, the troll happened. Harry heard about it the way everyone heard about it, the Halloween feast interrupted by a purple-faced Professor Quirrell in a state of performed terror that Harry watched with the specific attention he'd been giving Quirrell for 2 months now. Troll. In the dungeons. Thought you ought to know. Then fainting, which was theatrical. The dungeons are where Slytherin is, Daphne said, from the Slytherin table, in a voice flat enough to contain very precise frustration. Prefects began moving students toward their dormitories. Harry was already thinking. Hermione, he said. Ron looked up. What? She went to cry in the girls' bathroom. 3rd floor. She doesn't know about the troll. He was already standing. He looked at Ron, who was closest, and saw the same realization cross Ron's face. They'd been dismissive of Hermione that afternoon over something stupid, the particular social cruelty of 11-year-olds who don't know they're being cruel yet. Ron stood immediately. I'll come, Ron said. 3rd floor bathroom, East Wing, Harry said, moving against the flow of students. McGonagall was occupied managing the evacuation, Dumbledore was moving with purpose toward the teacher end of the hall, neither of them was looking at two first-year boys moving the wrong way. They found the corridor first. The smell hit them 20 feet from the bathroom, mountain troll, which Harry had read about in Fantastic Beasts and which the text described as an odor of considerable unpleasantness in the specific understatement of academic writing about things that could kill you. The troll itself was ahead, moving with the heavy purposeless momentum of something that had not found what it was looking for yet. Harry stopped and looked at it and did three things simultaneously: assessed size and speed, noted that the door on the left was the bathroom, and realized the troll was between them and the bathroom door. "Distraction," he said to Ron. "Loud. Make it turn. And stay back." Ron opened his mouth. "Ron. Loud. Now." Ron shouted something at the troll with the genuine volume of a boy from a large family who had been competing for attention since infancy. It was ear-splitting. The troll turned. Harry moved along the right wall, fast, below the troll's eye level, reached the bathroom door and pushed it. Hermione was against the far wall with both hands over her mouth and the expression of someone who had understood all at once that the world was capable of significantly more danger than she'd accounted for. The troll was already turning back toward the open door, following the scent or the sound or both. "Hermione," Harry said, keeping his voice completely steady. "When it comes in, move left. It'll follow you. I need it to follow you for exactly 3 seconds. What, trust me? 3 seconds." She looked at him. He could see her processing it, the specific quality of a very intelligent person deciding whether to trust a plan they don't understand because the person offering it is calm. 3 seconds, she said. The troll came in. It was enormous and it smelled like something had died inside something that had already died, and it had a club that it swung with the artless enthusiasm of something that had never needed technique. Hermione moved left. The troll followed. Harry cast Wingardium Leviosa at the club. He'd practiced the motion from the theoretical notes for weeks, and performed it once in Charms class with a feather, which was not a 12-foot wooden club, but the mechanics were identical, and the spell left his wand with a clarity and force that surprised even him. He hadn't calibrated for how much more power came through when the intent was real and the stakes were present. The club rose fast. The troll registered this with the slow indignation of something that had never had its weapon taken away before. Harry flicked his wand. The club dropped directly onto the troll's head. The sound it made was extraordinary. The troll sat down heavily and then, with the dignified finality of something that had been having a bad day, toppled sideways. The corridor was silent except for Hermione's breathing, which was very fast, and Ron's, which was similar but from the door where he was pressed against the frame looking at Harry with an expression that moved through shocked, awed, and settled on something more complicated. "Is it dead?" Ron asked. "Unconscious," Harry said. "I pulled the levitation before it impacted. A dead troll would have made more mess." He looked at Hermione. "Are you hurt?" "No." She looked at the troll. She looked at Harry. "You calculated the impact force." "Roughly." "I didn't want to kill it. It came in through the third-floor corridor, which means someone let it in, which means it's evidence." He walked over to her. "Can you walk?" "Yes, She stopped. "Someone let it in." "Yes." Quirrell said there was a troll in the dungeons," Harry said. "It was on the 3rd floor. Those aren't the same place." He held her gaze. This was not an accident. Hermione looked at him for a long moment and he could see the exact shape of the thought completing itself in her mind, the same shape his had taken, weeks of careful observation arriving at the same point. "The 3rd-floor corridor," she said quietly. "Yes." McGonagall arrived with Snape and Quirrell 30 seconds later. McGonagall looked at the unconscious troll, at Hermione against the wall, at Ron at the door, at Harry standing in the middle with his wand in his hand and an expression of composed calm. She made a sound that was briefly and involuntarily inarticulate before professional authority reasserted itself. "Can someone explain?" Hermione didn't know about the troll, Harry said. "She was in the bathroom. Ron and I came to find her. The troll came in through that door. It was in the corridor, not the dungeons, which seems worth noting." He looked at McGonagall directly. "I levitated its club above it and let it fall. Unconscious, not dead. I thought it should be examined." McGonagall looked at him for a long moment. Then at Hermione and Ron. "Is this," Ron started, then stopped, visibly doing a calculation. "Are we in trouble?" "You endangered yourselves considerably," McGonagall said, and her voice had the particular quality of authority containing something that was not anger. "However." She looked at the troll. 10 points each to Gryffindor. A pause. And 5 to Hermione for presence of mind. Hermione blinked. "I just moved left." "You trusted someone else's plan when you were terrified," Harry said. "That's harder than it sounds." McGonagall ushered them out. Snape was watching Harry as he passed. The quality of that watching was different from the classroom watching, less assessment, more information gathering. Harry met his eyes briefly, openly, and kept walking. Quirrell had not looked at Harry once. Which was, Harry thought, the most interesting thing that had happened tonight. He found a way to get a note to Daphne before curfew, Hedwig, roof to roof, Slytherin dormitory window, which Hedwig performed with the attitude of an owl insulted by the simplicity of the task. The note said, "Troll on 3rd floor, not dungeons." Quirrell's information was wrong. Troll came through the corridor near the stone. "Suggest we discuss tomorrow. There's a game happening around the stone that's accelerating. Are you all right?" Her reply came back within the hour. "I am fine. We were escorted to dungeons immediately." "You dealt with the troll yourself." "I am not surprised." "Yes, discuss tomorrow." "And Potter, well done." He read "well done" twice and thought about what Astoria had said, "She needs both but she won't ask for the nice part." He wrote back, "You would have managed it differently and probably more efficiently. I want to hear your analysis before I solidify mine." Her reply, "That's the 3rd time you've asked for my analysis before forming your own. You should know your instincts are generally correct and asking isn't a delay, it makes the conclusion better. Also, thank you for Granger." Harry read that and felt the warm inconvenient thing in his chest again, more pronounced than before. He wrote, "She moved left." Daphne wrote back, "She trusted you." Same thing. He put the note with the others in his folder, which was the most honest filing system he had. November became December. The political landscape shifted in small ways that added up. Augusta Longbottom wrote to Harry for the 2nd time, not to Neville, to Harry, asking for his analysis of a proposed amendment to the creature rights subcommittee structure. He wrote back a thorough 3-page response, discussed it with Daphne, revised 2 paragraphs, and sent it. Augusta wrote back a single line, "Correct analysis. We'll vote accordingly." Neville, when Harry mentioned the correspondence obliquely, looked at him with the expression of someone recalibrating who their grandmother was. "She doesn't write to people," Neville said. "She writes at them." "She wrote to me," Harry said. "I know." Neville looked at him for a moment. "She likes you." "She respects careful thinking," Harry said. "Same thing," Neville said, with a gentleness that Harry thought came from knowing Augusta Longbottom his whole life. For her, same thing. The Quidditch match happened in mid-November. Harry wasn't playing, but he watched from the stands with Hermione and Neville and saw the Gryffindor Seeker's broom begin to shudder violently in a way that was not natural. He watched the teachers. He watched Quirrell in the stands, moving his lips, and he watched Snape in the teacher's box, his own lips moving, eyes on the broom. He watched Hermione knock into Quirrell on her way to set Snape's robes on fire, which she'd clearly decided on a theory that Harry had reached 2 weeks ago and not shared yet because he hadn't confirmed it. He found her after the match. Snape wasn't jinxing the broom, he said. She stopped. What? The counter curse. He was doing the counter curse. He watched her work through it. Quirrell was jinxing. Snape was blocking. Hermione was very still for a moment. I set the wrong person's robes on fire. You acted on incomplete information quickly in a high-stress situation, Harry said. And the broom stopped when you knocked Quirrell over, so the result was right even if the theory was wrong. He paused. We need to talk to Daphne tonight. About Quirrell. About what Quirrell wants from the stone and why he hasn't taken it yet. Harry looked at the emptying pitch. Something's stopping him. There are obstacles between him and it, and one of them is that he doesn't have everything he needs. He paused. Yet. Hermione looked at him. Harry. If you're right about all of this, I know. You're not going to go after it yourself, she said. It came out half statement, half question. Not unless I have to, he said. What does that mean? It means I'd rather give Dumbledore the chance to handle it properly. He met her gaze. But I want to know what I'd do if he doesn't. Hermione was quiet for a moment. Then she said, What would you do? He thought about Daphne's face in the library when she said be careful, and Neville on a boat saying my mom and dad went here, and Astoria's letter with its 3 precise questions, and his mother's face in a garden photograph laughing at something his father said. Whatever I had to, he said. The wind came across the emptied pitch and picked up a last piece of confetti from the match and took it up and away, high and small against the grey Scottish sky, and Harry watched it go. Chapter 6, Stone and Standing. The last week before Christmas was when Harry stopped waiting. It happened at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday, in the specific silence of a castle that had gone quiet after curfew, when Hedwig arrived at his dormitory window with a note from Daphne written in the tight, efficient script she used when she was writing fast. He opened it by wand light and read it once and then sat very still for a moment. Heard Quirrell in the corridor outside the Slytherin dorms near midnight. Speaking to someone who wasn't there, or wasn't visible. I caught 3 words clearly before he turned the corner. He said, Not yet ready. The voice that answered wasn't his. It came from the back of his head. I'm certain of this. Harry put the note down. The back of his head. He sat with that for 30 seconds, working through the implications in order. Quirrell as host, not Quirrell as servant, but Quirrell as occupied. A body sharing a body, which was magic of a complexity and darkness that Harry had read about only in the restricted reference sections of 2 texts and which was not theoretically possible unless the occupying entity was operating in a specific kind of diminished state. Not fully corporeal. Borrowing. His scar prickled once, sharp and immediate, like a finger pressed against a bruise. He got up, dressed, and went to the common room. He sat by the low fire and thought methodically for 45 minutes, and by the end of it he had the shape of what he needed to do. In the morning he told Hermione and Neville over breakfast, quietly, with the others around them generating enough noise to make privacy easy. He told them all of it, Daphne's note, the voice, what it meant about Quirrell's condition, the timeline he'd been building since September. Hermione went very still in the way she did when something she'd suspected crystallized into something she knew. Neville kept his eyes on his porridge and his hands very steady on his spoon, which Harry had learned was how Neville processed difficult things. He went quiet and careful and handled the feeling before he handled the information. He's going to try for the stone over the holidays, Hermione said. The school empties, Harry said. Most students go home. Most staff reduce. The protections around the stone are significant but they're fixed obstacles, they don't adapt to a sustained attempt over multiple days. He paused. I think the attempt is coming between Christmas and New Year. What do we do? Neville said, still looking at his porridge. You 2 are going home for Christmas, Harry said. Hermione looked up sharply. Harry, I'm not being protective, I'm being strategic. I need people who know what's happening to be out of the building so that if something goes wrong, the information survives and can be acted on. He looked between them. If all three of us go for the stone and something goes wrong, nobody knows what happened. If you two know and you're safe and he paused, if the situation develops, you can go to Cyrus Greengrass directly. He has the Wizengamot contacts to act immediately. Neville finally looked up from his porridge. You're going to be here over Christmas? Yes. With Daphne? Yes. Hermione looked at him with an expression that had moved through argument and arrived at something more complicated. You've already decided. I'm telling you, not asking you, Harry said. But I want you to know everything, which is why I'm telling you. You don't have to do anything with it unless you need to. Hermione was quiet for a moment. I hate this plan, she said. I know. It's a good plan. I know. That makes it worse, she said, and ate her toast with the focused energy of someone who was angry at logic. Daphne, he told that afternoon. She listened to all of it and then said, you want to go into the third-floor corridor. I want to know what's in there and what the obstacle course looks like so that if I need to move, I'm not navigating it blind. He met her gaze. Not to get the stone. To understand the geography. Those are different things until they're the same thing, she said. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. The library was quiet around them, December light coming gray and thin through the windows, the castle down to perhaps a third of its usual population as students left for the holidays in waves. I'm staying over Christmas, she said. I know. You knew before you came to tell me? I guessed, he said. You wouldn't go home when something interesting was happening here. A pause that contained several things. That's either a compliment or an observation. Both, he said. They're not mutually exclusive. She looked at him for a moment, the composed expression, the gray eyes, the slight thing at the corners that wasn't quite a smile but was more than its absence. Then she looked back at her book. Wednesday night, she said. After 11. We look at the corridor and assess what's there. Nothing more unless it becomes necessary. Agreed. And if it becomes necessary, she stopped. You don't do anything alone. Daphne, that's not a request, she said, simply. That is the condition under which I am helping you. He looked at her profile. The straightness of her spine and the way her hands were flat on the table and the fact that she was not looking at him when she said it, because she had learned as well as he had that some things were easier to say to the middle distance. All right, he said. Together. Good, she said, and turned a page. Christmas at Hogwarts was a different building. The castle at 2/3 population was grand and busy and historical in the way of a working institution. At 1/3 population, with the great hall decorated and the fires banked higher and the corridors quieter, it became something else, more itself, somehow, more purely the old stone thing it had been before 700 years of students. Harry found he loved it. He ate Christmas breakfast with 12 other students, including a Hufflepuff third year who taught him to play gobstones with the evangelical patience of someone who knew they were going to win and wanted to give their opponent a fair chance first. Daphne spent Christmas morning in the library, which she acknowledged herself was perhaps excessive, and came to the Great Hall for lunch with a book under her arm and sat across from Harry and ate lunch while reading, which Harry found he didn't mind at all. It was a comfortable silence. He'd read enough of her silences by now to know the comfortable ones from the working ones from the processing ones, and this one was just Daphne Greengrass reading a book and being present in a room without performing either thing. What's the book? He asked. Advanced Runic Theory. She turned a page. I've been thinking about the protections around the stone. The level of enchantment required. You've been thinking about the stone on Christmas morning. I've been thinking about the stone since October. She looked up. Haven't you? He thought about his notebook, which had 14 pages on the subject now. Yes, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Merry Christmas, Potter. Merry Christmas, Greengrass. She looked back at her book. My sister sent you something, she said, as though reporting weather. Harry looked at her. She reached into the pocket of her robes and put a small wrapped parcel on the table and went back to reading. He opened it. Inside was a small glass paperweight, deep green glass with something silver suspended in it, catching the candlelight. And a note in Astoria's handwriting, "This is from our garden. The silver is a preserved piece of a moonflower that bloomed on the night you went to the Wizengamot. Father said it was a good night and I thought it should be remembered properly. Also I have reread your letter 6 times. Harry held the paperweight in his hand for a moment. He looked across the table at Daphne, who was reading with the complete composure of someone who had not arranged any of this and whose sibling had acted entirely independently. Tell her thank you, he said. You can write to her yourself, Daphne said. She'll prefer it. I know. I will. He put the paperweight carefully in his inner pocket. She's remarkable. She's 9. She's remarkable and 9. He paused. You taught her. Daphne turned a page. Her composure did a very slight thing at the corners of her eyes. I taught her everything she uses properly, she said. What she does with it is her own. Harry thought that was the most honest thing he'd ever heard someone say about raising another person. Wednesday night, 11:15. The castle was deeply asleep. Harry moved through it under his invisibility cloak, a Christmas gift that had arrived that morning with no note, which was itself a note, and which he'd held for a long moment before putting on, thinking about the hands that had wrapped it and why, and what it meant about what Dumbledore thought was coming and whether the gift was genuine kindness or a managed contingency. Perhaps both. Perhaps Dumbledore genuinely loved him in the specific way you could love someone whose role in your plans required their courage. He'd taken the cloak anyway, because it was useful regardless of the motivation behind it. Daphne met him at the entrance to the 3rd-floor corridor at 11:17, arriving from the Slytherin side with the soundless precision of someone who had been moving through this building for months and knew its particular creaks. She looked at the air where Harry stood. He pulled the cloak off. She nodded. Locked, she said, looking at the door. Alohomora, Harry said, and the door opened. They went in. The 3-headed dog was asleep. It was enormous. The description in Fantastic Beasts did not quite account for the reality of it, the sheer mass, the way 3 separate skulls rested at 3 separate angles with the profound unconsciousness of something that was used to this and did not fight it. Its feet, each the size of a dining table, were curled. Under the largest foot was a trapdoor. Harry looked at it carefully. Fluffy, he said quietly. Daphne looked at him. Hagrid named it. He'd got this from Ron, who'd got it from Fred, who had somehow acquired this information in the way Fred Weasley acquired all information, through a combination of curiosity and total disregard for appropriate boundaries. The music puts it to sleep. Someone got here before us. There's a harp playing in the corner. There was indeed a small harp in the corner, enchanted, playing something slow and repetitive that filled the room with the ambient quality of a lullaby. Quirrell, Daphne said. Or tonight is the night, Harry said. They looked at each other. The trapdoor was open. They didn't discuss it. Harry thought afterward that this was the thing about people who understood each other properly. The moment of decision happened without words because the analysis had already been done, separately and together, over months of cold library afternoons and careful notes and a trust built not from familiarity but from the specific intimacy of 2 people who showed each other exactly how they thought. He went first. She followed. The fall was into darkness and then into something soft, devil's snare, which Harry recognized immediately from its texture and the specific cold of it and the way it began to tighten. He went completely still and relaxed every muscle in his body, and he heard Daphne land beside him and felt her stillness match his, and the plant released them both within 10 seconds, and they dropped. You knew not to struggle, she said. Herbology reading. You? Same. A pause. Neville would have been very good at this room. Yes, Harry said. He would have. They moved forward. The keys were a spectacle, hundreds of them on wings, a broomstick in the center of the chamber, and one lock in the door on the far side. Harry looked at the lock, which was modern, which meant the key was modern, and the modern key would look different from the antique ones, which meant, he spotted it in about 30 seconds. A large silver key with a crumpled wing, recently damaged, recently used. He took the broom up and got it on the first pass. He flew the way he thought, with the efficiency of not wasting motion, unlocked the door, and brought Daphne through. The chess board was enormous. And on the white side, the pieces were gone. He already passed this, Harry said. He's ahead of us, Daphne said. They were at the black side. Harry looked at the pieces, real, stone, twice human height, and looked at the board. Someone had played through from the white position and made a route. He could see the path of captures on the board, the empty squares, the taken pieces pushed to the side. The black pieces were waiting. Untouched. Harry looked at the board for 60 seconds. What do you need? Daphne said. She wasn't trying to solve it with him, she was positioning herself to support whatever he needed, which was its own kind of intelligence. I need to get us through without either of us sitting in as pieces, he said. If we join the board we play by its rules. If we stay outside it, we can't cross without the pieces acknowledging us, she said. The enchantment would, unless we play the board from a position that's already in checkmate. He looked at the white pieces' path. He moved through in 9 moves. He opened a path. That path is still open. White already made those captures, those squares are clear. He turned to her. We move along the cleared squares. White's path. We don't engage the black pieces at all because we're not entering as players. We're walking through a completed game, she said. The black pieces are waiting for a challenge. If we don't offer one, they don't engage. She looked at the board. That's either very clever or completely wrong. One way to find out, he said. She looked at him for exactly 1 second. Then she stepped onto the first cleared white square. Nothing moved. They crossed the board in 90 seconds, stepping only on the cleared squares, and the black pieces watched them with the motionless attention of statues that were also somehow not statues, and then the door was open and they were through. The troll was already unconscious on the floor of the next chamber, its own club having dealt with it somehow. Harry looked at the angle and the position and guessed Quirrell, possibly with the cruder efficiency of a man who didn't feel the need for neatness. One more door. Harry recognized the potions puzzle immediately from the note on the table, logic, not magic. 7 bottles, a riddle, poison and nettle wine and the safe forward passage. He read the riddle through once and solved it in the time it took to read it a second time. Forward, he said, pointing. Daphne had read it simultaneously and arrived at the same bottle. They looked at each other. The back bottle sends you to the beginning, she said. Take it, Harry said. Go back through. Go to Snape, Harry, Daphne. He looked at her directly, in the blue-lit chamber, and said what was true. Whatever is in that room is Voldemort. Not just Quirrell, him. The thing in my scar. What happened to my parents? He kept his voice even. I have to go forward. You have to go back. Because if something happens to me in there, you are the only person in this building who knows exactly what happened and who will tell it accurately and to the right people. She looked at him with an expression that was doing several things at once, calculation and resistance and something else, something he didn't have language for yet, something that had been building in library afternoons and thumb against palm and be careful said to the middle distance. I'm coming back, he said. I'm not being brave. I'm being practical. I'm better equipped for what's in there than what comes after, and you're better equipped for what comes after than I am. That's not, she stopped. Picked up the back bottle. Looked at it. Go to Snape, Harry said. If he doesn't act, go directly to McGonagall. If neither of them, he paused. Do you still have the emergency contact protocol your father set up? The flu activation in the Slytherin common room for family emergencies. Her voice was controlled. Entirely controlled. Yes. Use it. He held her gaze. Cyrus will know what to do. She looked at him for a long moment in the blue light, and this time she didn't look away. I am going to be extremely angry at you after this, she said. I know. You'd better come back so I can be angry at you properly. I intend to, he said. She looked at him for one more second. Then she reached out and put her hand briefly on his arm, just a touch, just a second, just the exact pressure of something that didn't have a name yet and didn't need one yet, and then she drank the back bottle and stepped through and was gone. Harry picked up the forward bottle. He drank it and walked through the purple fire. The mirror of Eriste stood in the center of the last chamber like something that had been waiting specifically for him, which perhaps it had. Quirrell was in front of it, his back to the door, muttering. Harry walked in. Quirrell turned. He'd removed the turban. The back of his head, and this was the part that was difficult, that required a specific decision to simply accept and continue functioning, had another face on it. Pale, red-eyed, barely there, like a thing that had been compressed into the available space and was not comfortable in it. Harry Potter, Quirrell said. His stammer was entirely gone. Professor Quirrell, Harry said. The other face on the back of Quirrell's head moved. Use the boy, it said, in a voice like something scraped against cold stone. Harry looked at the mirror. He understood what it did, Eriste backward, desire, it shows the deepest desire of the one looking into it. He'd read about it in Enchanted Objects and Their Properties, a supplementary text. And he understood, in the moment of looking at it, what Dumbledore had engineered. The protection was not a monster or a puzzle. It was a riddle of desire. The stone would only appear to someone who wanted to find it, not use it. He walked to the mirror. He looked into it. He saw his parents first, his mother's red hair, his father's glasses, and the particular quality of two people who were vivid and present in a way that the garden photograph could only approximate. He let himself see them for exactly 3 seconds. Then he looked for something else in the mirror's depth. He thought about what he actually wanted in this moment, not to use the stone, not to possess it, not to bring anyone back or make himself immortal or any of the dark specific longings the mirror was designed to exploit. What he wanted, standing here, was for this situation to be over. For the stone to be somewhere Quirrell and whatever road Quirrell couldn't reach it. The stone appeared in his pocket. He felt it arrive, small and warm and present, a physical weight in his robe. He kept his expression completely still and did not look down. What do you see? Quirrell said. My parents, Harry said honestly, because it was true and because it bought him the most time. He's lying, said the voice at the back of Quirrell's head. Check his pockets. Quirrell stepped toward him. Harry moved. He didn't move away, he moved forward, directly at Quirrell, because backward was the direction with the door and the door was what he needed, and he hit Quirrell's arm hard enough to stop him and put both hands on Quirrell's face because it was the fastest contact he could make and, the burning started immediately. Harry had not expected this. His hands on Quirrell's face produced something that was wrong and right simultaneously. Quirrell burned, and Harry's hands burned back, and the voice screamed from behind Quirrell's head with a sound that wasn't sound but pressure, and Harry held on. The thing wearing Quirrell fought. It was strong, not physically, Quirrell was thin and not particularly large, but the other presence in the room, the compressed thing in Quirrell's skull, threw itself at Harry with the furious desperation of something that had been patient for years and was not accustomed to being denied. Harry felt it hit his mind like a stone against water, a surface he hadn't known he had, and he pushed back. He didn't know how to push back. He'd read nothing about this specific thing. But the same principle he'd applied to every other obstacle in his life applied here: understand what it's trying to do and don't let it. What the presence was trying to do was find the thing he was most afraid of and fill his entire awareness with it. Harry let it look. He thought, go ahead. Look at everything. There is nothing here you can use. He thought about the garden photograph. He thought about Daphne's hand on his arm for 1 second in a blue-lit room. He thought about Neville on a boat saying my dad went here and Hermione's annotated book and Astoria's letter with its 3 precise questions and Mrs. Albright at the reference desk saving books for a small boy with 2 big glasses. The presence looked at all of it and found nothing it could weaponize, and for one moment Harry felt its surprise, genuine, the surprise of something encountering resistance it didn't have a category for, and then Quirrell's skin under his hands went wrong and Harry let go and stepped back. Quirrell collapsed. The voice screamed again, and then it did something that Harry didn't have a frame for. It rose from Quirrell's falling body like heat off summer pavement, like something being distilled from solid form into something less, and passed through Harry on its way to whatever was next. For a second, one full second, Harry felt the cold of it go through him like stepping into a river in January. His scar was a white line of pain that he decided not to be distracted by. Then it was gone. Harry stood in the chamber with Quirrell unconscious on the floor and the mirror behind him and the stone in his pocket, and he thought, all right. That's done. He put the stone on the floor in front of the mirror, in the exact center of the room, where it would be found by whoever came next and where he would not be the one holding it when they arrived. Then he walked out. He woke in the hospital wing. The ceiling was familiar in the specific way of ceilings you've stared at while thinking very hard, white plaster, high, stone above it. He could tell from the light that it was morning. He could tell from the smell that Madame Pomfrey had been burning something medicinal. He could tell from the sounds to his left that he was not alone. He turned his head. Daphne was sitting in the chair beside his bed. She was in her school robes, she was extremely upright, and she was looking at him with an expression that had been composed for some time and was currently doing several things simultaneously. She had a book open in her lap that she had clearly not been reading. "You're awake," she said. "How long?" Harry said. His voice came out rougher than expected. 16 hours. A pause that lasted approximately 1 second. "You said you were coming back." "I did come back. After 16 hours. It was a complicated night." Daphne looked at him for a moment. Then she closed the book she hadn't been reading and put it precisely on the bedside table. "Snape arrived at the chamber 40 minutes after I reached him," she said. "Dumbledore arrived 6 minutes after Snape, which means he was already coming before Snape contacted him, which means he was watching through some mechanism we haven't identified." She held Harry's gaze. "Quirrell is dead." "I know. You knew he would be." "I knew Voldemort wouldn't leave a host alive on his way out." Harry said it evenly. "The entity that was sharing Quirrell's body is dispersed but not destroyed. It will find another way to reconstitute eventually." Daphne was very still. "You know this?" "Yes." "How certain are you?" "Certain enough that it should be factored into every plan we make for the next several years." He met her gaze. "It's not a crisis. It's a variable." She looked at him for a long moment. "You were going to tell me all of this when you came back." "Yes. But you needed to be sure you were coming back first." "Yes." He paused. "Thank you for going to Snape." "He was already moving by the time I reached him," she said. "He suspected. He'd suspected for months. He was watching Quirrell and waiting for Dumbledore to act, and when I appeared at his classroom door at midnight he looked at me for approximately 3 seconds and then summoned his cloak." Something moved across her expression. "He asked if you were already inside." "What did you tell him?" "I said yes." He said," she paused, and whatever came next she said with the precision of someone quoting accurately, "He said of course he is." And he left. Harry thought about Snape. He thought about a man who carried old grievances in his chest like a coal and had been sitting in this school for months watching a threat build and being held in check by a chess game he didn't fully control. Of course he is. Said about the son of a man he'd hated, to the girl who was going to become, what? Whatever they were. Is Dumbledore here? Harry asked. He's been in and out. He's giving you time to wake up. A pause. He'll be here within the hour, I expect. I know. Harry looked at the ceiling. He's going to try to control the narrative. He already has, partially, Daphne said. There's a version of what happened last night that is already circulating among the staff. In that version, you acted impulsively out of bravery, overcame the obstacles through luck and courage, and Dumbledore arrived in time to prevent the worst consequences. She said it without inflection. It's not entirely false. It's not entirely true either. No. She met his gaze. 3 people came to my father this morning via flu. He's already in the building. Harry sat up. Madame Pomfrey said, I'm fine, Harry said, moving to the edge of the bed. My hands are a little, your hands, Daphne said, standing, were burned by contact with a host of Voldemort and healed overnight by Madame Pomfrey and are probably still tender and you should not, Daphne. She stopped. I'm fine, he said, more quietly. I promise. She looked at him for a moment with the expression that didn't have a name yet and hadn't needed one yet. Then she put her hands in front of her and looked at his. He held them out. She looked at them, they were slightly pink, fading, the residual heat of a significant burn going back toward normal skin. She looked at them for a long moment. Not touching them. Just looking. All right, she said, and stepped back. Your father's dress robes are in the wardrobe here. I had them brought from your dorm. A pause. Formal occasion. Harry looked at her. You prepared for this. I've been sitting here for 6 hours, she said. I had time to think. Cyrus Greengrass was in the corridor outside the hospital wing with Augusta Longbottom and a witch Harry recognized as Marchioness Selwyn, who had nodded at him in the ministry corridor in August with the expression of profound personal satisfaction. All 3 of them looked at Harry when he came out, still slightly pale, formal robes, Daphne 2 steps behind him, and Cyrus's expression did the same thing Daphne's posture did when she was not going to show that she was relieved. Lord Potter, Cyrus said. Lord Greengrass. Harry looked between them. Thank you for coming. Daphne's contact protocol was explicit, Cyrus said. We came. He looked at Harry steadily. Dumbledore is in his office. He's asked to see you. I know. Harry looked at Augusta. I was informed of developments, she said, in the precise tone of a woman who had decided that whatever was happening, she intended to be present for it. I thought it appropriate to attend. I'm very glad you did, Harry said. He looked at the Marchioness. Lady Selwyn. Lord Potter. She looked at him with those sharp, satisfied eyes. Quite a night. Yes, Harry said. I'd like everyone here when I speak to Dumbledore, if you're willing. A slight pause. All of us? Cyrus said. You're 3 Wizengamot members. 2 neutral, 1 independent with historically documented concerns about specific aspects of ministry oversight. He looked at them steadily. If this conversation happens in front of witnesses, the account of it is fixed. I'd like a fixed account. Augusta Longbottom looked at him for a moment. Then she said, lead the way. Dumbledore's office had the same careful arrangement as before, instruments, portraits, the pensieve in its cabinet, Fawkes on his perch. Fawkes looked at Harry when he entered and made a sound that was quiet and warm and specifically addressed to him, which Harry found he appreciated. Dumbledore rose when they came in. He looked at the group, Harry, Daphne, Cyrus, Augusta, Selwyn, and something moved behind the half-moon spectacles, a rapid and complete assessment, arriving at full understanding in approximately 1 second. "Harry," he said, warmly. "I'm very glad you're all right." "Thank you," Harry said. "So am I." He looked around the office, at the chairs, and rather than sitting in the student's chair across the desk, he moved to the grouping by the window, the chairs arranged for conversation between equals, not the instructional arrangement of headmaster and pupil, and sat there. Daphne sat beside him. The others arranged themselves with the naturalness of people who understood what the geography of a room communicated. Dumbledore paused for just a moment. Then he came around his desk and sat across from them, and the arrangement he'd built in this room was different from the one he'd intended, and he was too good not to know it. "I owe you," Dumbledore said, directly to Harry, a significant apology. Harry had not expected him to open with that. He kept his expression even and waited. "The stone should not have been brought to this school," Dumbledore said. "I believed the protections were sufficient. I believed I understood the threat." He held Harry's gaze without deflection, which Harry thought was genuine and therefore more important than almost anything else he could have done. "I was wrong about both. You and Miss Greengrass might have been seriously harmed." "We were not," Harry said. "Because you are both considerably more capable than I accounted for." A pause. "Which is itself something I should examine." Harry looked at him steadily. "The stone is on the floor of the last chamber," he said. "I left it where whoever arrived could find it and I would not be the one holding it." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "Yes. Severus retrieved it." He looked at Harry with something that was real and unprepared and that Harry recognized as the specific emotion of a man looking at something and realizing he'd been wrong about its shape. "Why?" "Because the stone's power should not be in anyone's hands right now," Harry said. "Including yours." "Including mine." He paused. "I assume it's being sent back to Flamel." "It will be destroyed," Dumbledore said. "Nicholas and Perenelle have discussed it at length. They are at peace with the decision." "Good," Harry said. A silence. Fawkes made another soft sound. Phineas Nigellus Black was very carefully pretending to be asleep in his portrait, which meant he was listening with everything he had. "I need to tell you some things," Harry said. "And I need to tell you them in front of these witnesses, not because I don't trust you," he saw Dumbledore register the precision of that, "but because information that's witnessed is information that can be acted on by more than one person." Dumbledore looked at the group around him. Then he looked at Harry and said, simply, "All right." "Voldemort is not gone," Harry said. "Whatever happened 11 years ago dispersed him but didn't destroy him. He was in the school this year, in Quirrell's body, because he was too weakened to exist independently. Last night he left Quirrell when his host became unviable, and he is dispersed again, but he will reconstitute." He kept his voice even and factual. "I believe you know this." "I do," Dumbledore said. "I believe there's a prophecy," Harry said. Dumbledore was very still. "I don't need to know the content of it right now," Harry said. "I'll need to know it eventually, and I want that conversation to happen on my timeline rather than yours, and I want it witnessed. But I don't need it today." He looked at Dumbledore steadily. "What I need today is for you to stop holding information about my life and my family and my history on the basis that I'm not ready for it. That decision belongs to me." The silence was complete. Cyrus Greengrass had his hands folded in his lap and was looking at the window with the expression of a man hearing something he has thought for a long time being said aloud. Augusta Longbottom was looking at Dumbledore with an expression Harry couldn't fully read but which contained, he thought, 10 years of accumulated something being given a place to rest. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long moment. Not with the warm managed regard he'd used before. With something more direct, more genuinely present, more, and Harry thought this was the right word, respectful. The look of a man encountering the full shape of something he'd been only partially seeing. "You're right," Dumbledore said. "I owe you that conversation. And I will have it with you." A pause. On your timeline. Thank you, Harry said. It was quiet. There's something else, Harry said. Yes? The proxy vote is gone. The political conversation I've been building is going to continue. He held Dumbledore's gaze. I'm not building it against you. I'm not trying to undermine what you've worked for. But I am going to be myself in this world, and make decisions for myself, and I would rather we work in parallel than at cross purposes. He paused. I think you genuinely want what's best for Wizarding Britain. I think I want the same thing. I think we're going to disagree about method. We probably will, Dumbledore said. Quite often. That's fine, Harry said. That's how it should be. Something moved across Dumbledore's face that was strange and warm and not quite what Harry had expected, something that looked, if he had to name it, like relief. As though the thing he'd been managing toward for 10 years had finally looked at him and said I can carry my own weight, and the weight had been heavier than he'd let himself admit. Yes, Dumbledore said, quietly. I believe you might be right. They were in the corridor outside the office, the late morning light coming through the high windows, and Cyrus was speaking in low tones with Augusta about something that would clearly become a letter to one of the 14 votes by the weekend. Selwyn had said her piece, 3 sentences, direct, something about the Wizengamot session in spring, and moved toward the stairs. Harry and Daphne were standing slightly apart from the adults, not having decided to, just finding themselves there. Phineas Nigellus, Daphne said. Heard everything, Harry agreed. It'll be in the right places by tonight. I know. That's fine. Harry looked at the window, the grounds below, the lake glittering, the morning that was very ordinary and very good. I meant what I said. I'm not fighting Dumbledore. I know you meant it. She was quiet for a moment. He'll still be difficult. He'll be himself. So will I. Harry paused. We'll figure it out. Daphne looked out the window beside him. The morning was wide and clear and Scottish, the kind of cold that made the air feel present, and the grounds were empty and white frosted, and somewhere far below a bird was doing something in a tree that made a small repeated sound. My sister wrote again, Daphne said. Yesterday morning. Before everything. What did she say? She said, a slight pause. She said she'd decided which one you were. Clever or brave? Harry looked at her. What's her verdict? Daphne turned from the window and looked at him directly, and her expression was the unguarded one, the real one, the one without the composed overlay, the one that happened in library afternoons and blue-lit chambers and when she'd looked at his hands. She said those are the same thing, Daphne said, in the right person. Harry looked at her for a moment. The morning light was very clear. She's 9 and she's already smarter than most adults I've met, he said. I know, Daphne said, and the not laugh was a real smile this time, brief, unguarded, entirely itself. Gone quickly, but there, and real. Harry looked at it and thought, I'll see that again. Not as a political calculation. Not as a strategic observation. Just as a fact about what he wanted, which was its own kind of new. Come on, he said. Let's go down to breakfast. I want proper food and I want to hear your full analysis of the chessboard and what Quirrell's path through tells us about what he was planning. It tells us several things, she said, turning toward the stairs with the exactness of someone settling into forward motion. His endgame was not the stone itself. I know. He needed something else. The mirror showed him something before you got there, she said. He couldn't retrieve it because he couldn't understand the enchantment, which means there's something about his character, or Voldemort's, that the mirror couldn't reflect back as a retrieval image. Harry fell into step beside her. Because people who want to use the stone see themselves using it, not finding it. Exactly. She was in full analysis mode now, the words coming precisely and fast. The enchantment is brilliantly designed. Dumbledore, whatever else I think about his choices, designed that protection correctly. He did, Harry agreed. They went down the stairs together, the morning light following them through the tall windows, landing in gold patches on the stone, and the castle was quiet and present around them, old and real and theirs for 6 more years. Greengrass, Harry said, halfway down. Potter. Thank you for staying. She was quiet for a step. You would have done the same, she said. I would, he said. That's the point. She looked at him sideways, brief and direct. Then she looked forward. Breakfast, she said. Breakfast, he agreed. They walked down into the warm, well-lit morning of the castle, and below them the great hall was beginning to fill with sound, small and distant and alive, and above them, in the portrait corridor, Phineas Nigellus Black was already talking to his counterpart in the Black family home, describing what he'd witnessed in the particular tone of a portrait that had been bored for decades and had finally been given something worth reporting. And in the Wizengamot chamber in the Ministry of Magic, 14 votes sat and breathed and waited, and the shape of the future was not fixed, it never was, but it had a direction now, chosen by a girl who needed to be seen completely and a boy who had learned to choose rather than be chosen, and that direction was their own.